Shabbat Shalom, everybody.
Shabbat Shalom.
Shalom.
Or should I say Shalom Tamidim? All right. After 40 years, somebody at least learned a couple of Hebrew words. How about that?
Shabbat Shalom.
Baruch atah Yahweh Eloheinu melech haolam asher kedishanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu l'shmoah kol shofar. Blessed are you, Yahweh Eloheinu, King of the universe, who has sanctified us by his commandments and commanded us to hear and respond to the call of the shofar.
Wonderful.
I wouldn't even think about it.
Isn't that nice? Well, Father, as we come before you this day, your Sabbath, your Shabbat, we look forward to the season of the Passover and the Feast of Unleavened Bread and the Feast of First Fruits coming up. Guide us today, Father, through your word, and help us to understand and to see you in the words of Moses. To see you as we go through and study all the sacrifices and the rules regarding the same. Grant us, Father, that you will show us wonders from your word this day. B'Shem Yehoshua. Amen. And the readings today are going to be, we're going to start in the book of what most people call Leviticus. And yeah, most people. Even us sometimes. We're going to be starting in chapter 1 and in verse 1, and we'll be reading through chapter 6 and verse 7. If you're in the Hebrew Bible, we'll be reading through chapter 5 and verse 26. The name of the reading today is Vayikra, which is also the Hebrew title for the book. Vayikra means "and he called." The name Leviticus actually comes from the Latin Vulgate. And the Greek word that was used was the Greek word Leviticon. The word itself means that which pertains to the Levites, which is where they got the name from. The title of Leviticus, though, is misleading because the book does not deal with the Levites as a whole, but with a segment of the Levites known as the priests, or the Kohanim. If you look at Exodus 19:6, before we started in Leviticus, Shemot, in verse 6, he says, "And you shall be to me a kingdom of priests, a holy or a set-apart nation. These are the words which you shall speak to the sons of Israel." It's always what his plan was, is for the whole nation to become a nation or a kingdom of priests. Okay? That's what he said. You shall be to me. If we consider ourselves part of the sons of Israel, the family of the house of Israel, then what are we supposed to be? We're supposed to be ministers of his word. And the word, Levi means to be joined to. And it's through our words then that we can maybe help other people become joined to Yahweh. Go to 1 Peter. You may already have all these things, written down as being a connecting, between the two. But if you haven't, you can look at it now in 1 Peter and in chapter 2. In verses 4 and 5. You see, Exodus said that they were chosen people to be priests, a kingdom of priests. And then here in what's called New Testament, which everybody says is different from the Old, Peter's saying the same thing. In verse 4 he says, "Coming to him, a living stone, rejected indeed by men, but chosen by Yahweh, precious. You also as living stones are being built up a spiritual house, a set apart or a holy priesthood, to offer up spiritual sacrifices acceptable to Yahweh through Yehoshua the Mashiach." So what are we supposed to be doing? Offering up what? Spiritual sacrifices. Well, if the word is spiritual, then one of the greatest things that we can do is to study and learn the word and offer up the word. Because it's the Word, that implanted Word, that's able to save your soul. I think it says that somewhere in Scripture. Okay? If you stop and think about something just a minute, we've talked before about the Levites and so forth, and we see the high priest and the priesthood being through the man Aaron, or Aaron, as people say, it's Aaron. If you haven't written it down, the name Aaron, the number is 175. Going through Brown Driver Briggs in the Gracinius Hebrew Lexicon, the name Aaron actually means the light bringer. So the children of Aaron would be who? The children of the light bringer. You know, go to 1 Thessalonians chapter 5. In verse 5, he says, "You are all sons of light and sons of the day. We are not of the night nor of darkness." Remember the Gospel of John said he was that light. So Aaron being the light bringer, you know, and people I think sometimes forget the importance of Aaron in the entire Scripture because he's kind of overshadowed by Moses and so forth. But Aaron's a picture of the light bringer himself. And it's his sons that were chosen then to follow through, the light bringer. The sons of him, you know. And then two of them did something that was what? Incorrect, and they mixed the things of the world with the things of Yahweh, and what happened to them? They died immediately. You don't mix the things of the world and the things of Yahweh. It's a lesson that gets lost so many times, overlooked. The main theme of the book of Vayikra, which is what's known as Leviticus, Vayikra is the word going back in chapter 1, and Yahweh called. And in the Hebrew it's Vayikra, and he called to Moshe. So it's and he called. The main theme of the whole book is the only way to Yahweh is through atonement. The only way to achieve atonement is through the shedding of blood. And the atonement can only be achieved through the work of the Mashiach. Everybody knows we have been reconciled to Yahweh, and now we are a dwelling place for Elohim, Yahweh, right? If you think about that, if Yahweh is the Word, and we have become a dwelling place for Yahweh Elohim, who is the Word, okay? So what should be living in you then? The Word. Go to Ephesians chapter 2. In Ephesians chapter 2, well, we'll start in verse 19. I want to get down to verse 22, but in a way this goes along with what Peter said that we just read a while ago. But in verse 19 it said, "Now therefore you are no longer strangers and foreigners, but fellow citizens with the saints and members of the household of Yahweh." See, Peter said we're being built up, you know, as stones. Verse 20, "Having been built on the foundation of the apostles and the prophets." You can't say that they're done away with because they're the foundation. "Yehoshua, the Mashiach himself, being the chief corner, in whom the whole building being joined together grows into a holy temple in Yahweh, in whom you also are being built together for a habitation of Yahweh in the Spirit, in the breath, in the Word." If He is the Word and He wants to live in you, well then you have to have the Word living in you. What happens if you don't have the Word living in you? You don't have the Spirit or Him or anything else, because His Word is His Spirit. Go to Colossians chapter 3. In verse 16. This plainly says, let the word of the Mashiach dwell in you richly in all wisdom, teaching and admonishing one another in psalms and hymns and spiritual songs, singing with grace in your hearts to Yahweh. Giving glory to Him, right? But that's saying let what word? The word of the Mashiach? Well, if Yahweh is the word, and Mashiach is the word made flesh, and the word is the breath and the spirit, then if you have the word of Yahweh living in you, then you have Yahweh, the Spirit, and the Son. And if you don't have the word, and remember it says blasphemy against the word or the Spirit, well, the word is the Spirit, right? So if you reject the word, you reject the Spirit. Maybe it's just my imagination, but it seems to me like all those things just kind of fit together, like, all the pieces going in on this puzzle. Go to Matthew chapter 4. In verse 4, Messiah had been led out into the wilderness to be tempted. And in verse 3 it said, now when the tempter came to him, he said, if you are the Son of Yah, command that these stones become bread. But he answered and said, it is written, man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word that proceeds from the mouth of Yahweh. How come Messiah said that, and what he said has never changed, and yet people today keep trying to say all that word that came out of his mouth has been done away with? You ever notice people saying things like that? But what does that mean? And that's a direct quote from Deuteronomy chapter 8 and verse 3. So, coming back to Leviticus, what's all this got to do with it? The only way to walk with Yahweh is through obedience to His laws and His statutes. And without studying these things, we never know what they are. So, again in verse 1 it says, now Yahweh called to Moshe and spoke to him from the tabernacle of meeting, saying, verse 2, speak to the sons of Israel, and say to them, when any, I think most English Bibles have the word any one of you brings an offering. Actually, the Hebrew word there is Adam. The number is 120. When any man of you brings an offering to Yahweh, you shall bring your offering of the livestock, of the herd, and of the flock. When any man of you, Adam, 120. Now he says, if a man brings this offering, it must be of what? Of the herd or of the flock. Okay? Realize most of the animals that he considers unclean, you don't have a herd of pig. You know, what are they? They're not a flock. And they're not, I don't know what they are, but boy, Anyway. You'll notice as we go through here, he describes what the offering must be and how it must be offered. If we then look at these offerings and sacrifices as pictures of the Messiah, then everything that's associated with these sacrifices is going to be something that reflects on Him and gives glory back to the Father. If you're looking for anything else in them, then you're going to see something that that's really not there. Chapters 1 through 5 of the book of Vayikra here is actually a manual for what I'd call just the common man, the everyday people. Because these give all the instructions, for the sacrifice and everything supposed to be brought, okay? Notice in verse 3, if his offering, and who is the his referring to? The any man in verse 2. If his offering is a burnt sacrifice of the herd, let him offer a male. Without blemish, he shall offer it of his own free will at the door of the tabernacle of meeting before Yahweh, or in the presence of Yahweh. The word offering there in verse 3 is a number 7133. It's a Hebrew word korban, or korban. It's the same thing that I use over in the book of Mark, we're going to look at it here in a minute. And the word korban actually means a sacrificial present. Sacrificial present means it cost you something to give it to him. If it didn't cost you anything, it's not a sacrifice. I mean, if you got $10 million and you give him 100, it sure wasn't a sacrifice, right? If you got $10, you give him 9, that's a pretty good sacrifice, isn't it? But if it didn't cost you anything, what good would it be? In the Pentateuch, and we're going to be referring to the Pentateuch quite a bit today, and in this particular section concerning them, on 410, it's talking about this word korban, and it said the Hebrew word korban denotes that which is brought near to Yahweh by presentation upon the altar. But alongside of this literal meaning, it likewise implies that the offering, if brought in the right spirit or attitude, kavanah, the attitude, is the medium whereby man attains to closer nearness to the divine. To draw near. It's a sacrifice, right? When we begin to see the purposes of all these sacrifices and what the people were using them for, and can we still do that today? And the answer is yes, we can. And we can every time that we refer it back and mention and understand the death of Messiah and what He's done for us. And through that we are drawing near to Yahweh. The whole purpose of Messiah when He was here doing that was to do what? To reconcile us back to the Father and bring us back into the graces of the Father, our favor. If people ever really understood what grace is, and it's through that shed blood we have been made back one with the Father, right? And that's what the grace really is. Instead of trying to use it to mean something else that it has no meaning for. So the book of Leviticus, or Vayikra, is actually in two parts. Part A is the sacrifice and laws pertaining to describe the work of the priesthood. And then part B would be holiness, that is, set apartness. If we ever really get a hold of this set apartness, and that's the walking in obedience and sanctifying human life. You see, one of the problems with Orthodox Jewish people beginning to accept the sacrificial death of the Messiah is because they understand that when Yahweh told Abram to offer up his son, and he took him up to offer him, and then he stopped him, well then human sacrifice was done away with. They can't understand then how this Messiah in the flesh, this man, can die a human sacrifice when Yahweh stopped it. It's because they never saw Yehoshua in the Torah or what he was going to do when he came. That's the problem. We talked about this a week or two ago. Seeing Yahweh in the words of Moshe. And when their eyes turn to and begin to see Yehoshua, then the veil comes off and they begin to see and understand. So this set apartness in the Pentateuch here, remember these are people who do not accept Messiah Yehoshua, but they do have a study or understanding. And some of these things goes back before Messiah came, and it was their understanding before he came. Set apartness or holiness. The other fundamental thought of the book is set apartness, that is the purity of life. You see, if we're set aside to Him, then we are living in a pure set aside life for Him, right? Purity of action, purity of thought, which befits a priestly nation. We've all seen the movies, about they got all these priests, of all these different gods and everything, and how wicked they are, and it's always a wicked priest against a good priest, and the good one always wins, right? But in reality, that's what you're facing in the world. You have Yahweh's world, which is set apart for Him, right? And then you have the God of this world, who is the adversary, who is against Yahweh. And you have to choose which one you want to live in. All the precepts in the book of Vayikra are a translation into terms of daily life of the divine call. In a way, you could go back and say this is a divine impulse. Because the impulse, the call that Yahweh puts on everybody's life, and people begin to follow His divine call or His divine impulse, they start living according to His word, right? And then when people start trying to fight against that, then they're going against the divine impulse or the call that He has on their life. And the word impulse itself is actually mean to do something according with what He said do. It's not impulse as in some kind of thing you do off the top of your head on the impulse or an emotion or something, or just but it's something that you choose to start walking according to His direction, and that's the impulse of walking in Him. He said, "Ye shall be holy or set apart, for Yahweh Eloheka, I am set apart." Holiness is an active principle shaping and regulating every sphere of human life and activity. In chapter 19, the demand is, "Ye shall be holy," is included in a series of sublime ethical doctrines. It is embodied in the dietary laws. The rule of holiness governs the body as well as the soul, since the body is the instrument through which alone the soul acts. Without the physical body, there's no way we could comply with the instructions of Yahweh. Okay? That's why Yahweh Himself had to become flesh and come to perform these things so that He become our Savior. Everybody said, "Oh, well, He had to be perfect. He couldn't break any law, because if He'd have broke any law, then He would have sinned and He couldn't have been our Savior," right? Well, if He still is He any different now than what He was before? Do you think He'd break them now? You think He's going to come back and say, "Oh, well, I kept all them things and I died, but now I can eat pig all I want to"? There's no way that even makes sense. And nobody would ever say that to you in those kind of terms, but when they do, that's what they're saying, that's what they're thinking, without realizing what they're thinking. The holy people, the set-apart people, are the set-apart Creator, is to keep themselves free not only from moral transgression, but also from ceremonial defilement, or even the very appearance of, which would weaken the barriers against the forces of heathenism and animalism that on all sides menaces the children of Israel. That's a pretty strong statement. And these people back in that time, and if you'll notice the connections they have to the set-apartness and the life and the purity of doing anything Yahweh said, they understand that. And those people, when they read the word that said that this word, this instruction is forever, knew that that didn't mean temporarily. It is forever. We're just now beginning to get a hold of a little bit of what Moses was trying to teach the people. And we see all the problems Moses had with the people. And he did have his problem, didn't he? And the thing about it is, we look at a little bit of it, and when we try to reach somebody, we try to talk to them, and they just, reject it or throw it back or, walk away or whatever, or anything comes up. Imagine that multiplied by 2 million, and that's what Moses was faced with. Okay? And we just see a little bit of it. Imagine Paul, and look how many people he tried to reach. And in all those believers, none of us, have been taken outside the city and stoned and left for dead yet.
Not yet.
It may come, but it hasn't happened yet. Okay.
Keep your armor on.
The burnt sacrifice, there in verse 3 that it's talking about, the olah, word sacrifice is 59:30. The word is olah, and it means ascending up as a stairway. A going up. Also it means a holocaust or a burning as going up in smoke. As going up in smoke. But whether it's a fire, it's still an ascending, a going up. Remember when Samson, or when he was conceived, or the Messiah came and spoke to his mother and father, and then they offered a sacrifice and put it out on the rock, and the man that they were talking to, whom they called the angel of Yahweh, and he said, "Well, I'm not going to eat it, but what did you do?" He set it on fire, and then he stepped upon the rock, and he went up in the fire, in the smoke from the sacrifice. It's a picture then of him and the sacrifice being one and the same, going up into the presence of Yahweh. The burnt offering represents Messiah, but it's his total submission to the Father's will. It's exactly what we saw in the garden when he cried, if it be your will, let this cup pass from me. But if not, your will be done, not mine. That's a total submission. We like to think that we are totally submitted to him, but that doesn't mean that we always are. We just, our society sometimes, puts things up there which won't let us be totally submitted to him. Like I say, we like to think we are, we say we are, but the question is, do we always constantly look at everything we're fixing to do in light of what the Word says? Not what somebody else thinks it says, but what the Word says. The word Korban, go to Mark 7. I think everybody's pretty familiar with the fact that if you were sitting in an Orthodox Jewish synagogue, studying these scriptures right now, they would not be talking to you about these sacrifices being a picture of Messiah Yehoshua. Would they? So what they're going to be talking about then is something they've been taught by the sages and the rabbis and the teachers and, going back for, a couple of thousand years, ever since somebody decided that Messiah, that Jesus that the church teaches can't be the one. And of course, we've all come to that conclusion ourselves. But in Mark 7, in verse 11, he said, "But you say, if a man says to his father or mother, whatever profit you might have received from me is Korban," that is dedicated to the temple, "and you no longer let him do anything for his father or his mother, making the word of Elohim of no effect through your tradition which you have handed down, and many such things you do." He said there's a lot of traditions you have like this. So any tradition that goes against the Scripture is not from Yahweh. Anything that you do, are you doing it because tradition says do it, because it's always been done that way, because, that's what I was taught? Where is the Scripture that backs it up? Without a Scripture to back up what you're doing, what purpose or what validity does what you do have? It's a waste of everything. In the study of sacrifice, again, in the Pentateuch here, it says, "The study of the origins of human worship has shown that animal sacrifice has been an institution among virtually all races of men." In Leviticus, all magic and incantation are banished from the sacrificial cult. If you remember when we were studying, we were reading about, Balaam and Balak. Balak hired him to come out and do all these things and curse the children of Israel so he could get all these kind of incantations and so forth and the mystery stuff, but then finally when he realized it wasn't necessary, he quit doing that and just went directly to Yahweh. Not that what he was doing was right, but Yahweh used him to speak not only to them but to us today. But he was mixing all these pagan incantations over, and we don't ever realize that's where a lot of our movies and horror movies and all this kind of stuff come from, these ideas. All magic and incantation are banished from the sacrificial cult, and everything idolatrous or unholy is rigorously proscribed. Unholy means what? Not set apart to Him. You can't mix the things of the world with the things of Him. Deliberate sins are excluded from the sphere of sacrifice. There is no sacrifice for deliberate sin. And in all cases, repentance and restitution of the wrong done must precede the sacrificial act. Do not get the word repentance mixed up with the word penance. That's a Christian traditional term that's used, if you do something sin or you do something bad, well then you have to make penance. No, that's not, that's traditions of men. The Scripture says you have to repent of it, which means you have to turn away and turn back in obedience to Yahweh's word. That's what repentance is. While there are resemblances between sacrifice in Israel and sacrifice among other peoples, there are also fundamental differences that transform sacrifice as ordained in the Pentateuch into a vehicle of communion and truth. If you understand the sacrifice as a picture of Messiah Yehoshua and you are partaking in that sacrifice, then you are sharing in Him. That's why He said, unless you eat my body, you have no part of me. He's not instituting cannibalism. But if He is the Word made flesh, then He's talking about eating the Word. People today don't want to do that, so they say that old word done away with. I know y'all get tired of hearing me say that, but it doesn't change the fact that it's still true. The burnt offering expressed the individual's self-surrender to Yahweh's will. The peace offering expresses gratitude for His bounties and mercies. The sin offering shows our sorrow at having erred from the way of Elohim and the firm resolve to be reconciled with Him. The congregational sacrifices for the group as a whole taught the vital lesson of the interdependence of all members of the congregation as a sacred brotherhood, and kept alive within the nation the consciousness of its mission as a kingdom of priests. That's what the national sacrifice is all about. But if you never understood the connection with the sacrifice and the picture of Messiah Yahushua, then you never understand the connection the nation has with the Messiah. And then, of course, when people come along and start preaching, how many different people have preached different messiahs throughout the ages of history, you know? Well, if the one that they were preaching didn't have anything to do with what the Scripture says, why would they follow him? Everybody remember a man by the name of Schneerson? Rabbi Schneerson, you know, lived up in New York. I think he was born in Chicago or someplace, I'm not sure exactly. But, man, never been to Israel. But yet he was considered what? The Messiah. Why? Never even been to Israel. Does anybody not recognize the fact that the Scriptures teach that the Messiah is supposed to be born where? In Bethlehem of Judea. Not Bethlehem in Galilee, because there's two Bethlehem, but Bethlehem, Judea. Most people don't realize there's two Bethlehems in Israel. What if they went to the wrong one? I'm just saying there's little bitty things in there throughout the Scriptures like that, and there's never really a big thing made about the fact that there's two Bethlehem, but there's one little verse refers to the Bethlehem up in the Galilee. The fact that it's there proves that it's there, unless you say this word is a lie. In verse 4, back in Leviticus, or Vayikra, he's talking about bringing this male of the herd. Without blemish he shall offer it of his own free will at the door of the tabernacle of meeting before Yahweh. Then he shall put his hand on the head of the burnt offering, and it will be accepted on his behalf to make atonement for him. The he is any man. It's going to be offered on his behalf, any man, to make atonement for him, who? Any man. Word atonement there in verse 4 is 37:22. Kafar. It means to cover. Literally, it means to expiate or to cancel. It's the root of the word kaparet, which means a lid or a cover, and this word kaparet is a word that's translated mercy seat, beginning in Exodus chapter 25, verse 17. Whose idea was that? English translators. Because it didn't exist as a mercy seat until then. So in verse 5, he, who is the he? Again, we're talking about this, any man. He shall kill the bull before Yahweh, and the priest, Aaron's son, shall bring the blood and sprinkle the blood all around on the altar that is by the door of the tabernacle of meeting. The person brought it, killed it. Any man. In verse 6, and he shall skin the burnt offering and cut it into its pieces. Again, it's the same man. You got to recognize who's doing that. Before we go to verse 7, go over to Vayikra, Leviticus chapter 7. Just get a little bit ahead, a little bit. Kind of keep everything in order. In Leviticus 7 and verse 8, now the man brought the animal and he's going to skin it. And then in verse 8 of Leviticus 7 it said, and the priest who offers anyone's burnt offering, that priest shall have for himself the skin of the burnt offering which he has offered. So when a man skins the animal, then the hide of that animal went to the priest who is there ministering for the man that brought the sacrifice. So go back in verse 7, or in verse 6, he shall skin the burnt offering and cut it into its pieces. So he skinned it and he cut it up in its pieces. Then in verse 7, the sons of Aaron the priest shall put fire on the altar and lay the wood in order on the fire. Again in the Pentateuch, it's talking about these pieces that they're laying on the fire and so forth. And they say that the burnt offering, the olah, signifies that which is sin, symbolizing the ascent of the soul in worship. By making the offering ascend to heaven, the one who offers it expresses his desire and intention to ascend himself to heaven, i.e. to devote himself entirely to Yahweh and place his life in Yahweh's service. But since communion with the Most High was impossible to anybody who was tainted with sin, it says, your iniquities have separated between you and your Elohim. And since no man could be sure of being sinless, the rite of the burnt offering first had an expiatory effect before they could do the rest of it. If you go to them to make the sacrifice and you don't have the right attitude, is the sacrifice accepted? After a while, it gets to the point where the sacrifice itself is the most important thing, and Yahweh is told to have the picture. The ritual become more important than the purpose it was done for. I think there's a place in Scripture, I can't find these words, but I think Yahweh's talking about his people. He said, my people love rituals. And they really do love rituals.
Rituals?
Rituals, yeah. And then in verse 4, when he's laying his hands between the horns of the animal, it said, by means of this act, the animal is designated as a representative or substitute of the man who brought the sacrifice. He's a substitute. That's the whole thing, Messiah Yahushua. All these were pictures of his substitute. The Torah was given, right? But if it was broken, then man was separated. So these animal sacrifices were a substitutionary atonement. But it pictured the one who's going to come and offer himself and actually to establish the entirety of the Torah for us. So the Torah was not totally established through the blood of animals, but it was through Messiah Yahushua. The Hebrew word for atonement, derived from an Arabic root meaning to cover, is now connected with the word kuparu, meaning to purge away sin. In view of the yearning for Yahweh's favor manifested in the bringing of the offering accompanied by confession and prayer, Yahweh would, as it were, wipe out the offense from his sight. So you have the means then to reconcile, to restore by atonement that inward sense of close relationship with Yahweh which is lost through sin, evil desire, or constant brooding upon sinful things. In English, the word atone, which now means make amends, originally meant to set at one or to reconcile persons who were at variance. At one meant. And now we change that to atonement. But people get separate from Yahweh when you begin to think and muse and meditate. And, in your mind, you're totally consumed with something that has no bearing with him. We get eat up with it. In verse 7, the sons of Aaron, the priest, shall lay fire on the altar and lay the wood in order on the fire. He put the fire and lay the wood on it, and then the priest, Aaron's son, shall lay the parts, the head, and the fat in order on the wood that is on the fire upon the altar. You lay all these pieces up here, and if you step back and look at it, what do you see? You see fire coming up between all the pieces. It's exactly the same thing you saw with Abraham when he laid the animals out on top of the rock, and then the fire walked between the pieces. And who was that walking in that blood, in that fire? Messiah Yahushua. It all goes back to the promise he made with Abram. Okay? Avram. Verse 9, but he shall wash its entrails and its legs with water, and the priest shall burn all on the altar as a burnt sacrifice, an offering made by fire, a sweet aroma to Yahweh. They're talking about this aroma. We have in our English Bible a sweet aroma. In other scriptures it says, or other translations, it says a sweet savor to Yahweh. And so it undoubtedly is, since it serves to remove the sinful thoughts from our hearts. If your heart's in the right place, your attitude, your mind, then you remove these thoughts, and you're repenting, you're going back, and then the effect of the offering upon the man who sacrificed it is pleasant to Yahweh. It's the change that occurs in you when you do that. This change that occurred in this man when he offered this burnt sacrifice, is that the same thing that we do today when we go before Yahweh and we repent of our sin and we thank him for the sacrifice of Messiah Yahushua? I wonder how many times on a daily basis when we confess our sins, we're actually also confessing the sacrifice of Messiah to atone for that. and to reconcile and realize that we have been made one with Yahweh again. I'm not sure people ever really, think about that on a routine, basis. But that's exactly what's happened. We have been made one with the Father through what the Son has done. Okay? If that stays in our mind, then we have to recognize the fact that, well, if I break His word, then I'm going to be separated from Him again. And if I do it deliberately, there is no sacrifice for that deliberate sin. That's what it talks about in the book of Hebrews. And then the sacrifice that Yahweh really wants is what? A broken and contrite heart and spirit. Someone who's broken by what you've done in the world and reconciled back to Him and determined never to fall back into that worldly thing again. In verse 10, and if his offering is of the flocks or the sheep or of the goats as a burnt sacrifice, he shall bring a male without blemish. Verse 11 is probably one of the most key verses to understanding some of the traditions that have sprung up within Christianity, which are false. Verse 11, he shall kill it on the north side of the altar before Yahweh, and the priest or her own son shall sprinkle the blood all around on the altar. Where did it have to be killed? On the north side of the altar. In Israel. In Jerusalem. Okay? On the Temple Mount, the temple itself would be facing the east. The back side of it is on the west. The altar is directly in front of the gate then on the east side of the altar. And the killing tables were placed in front of that altar on the north side. When Messiah was crucified in Israel, he was taken out to Golgotha, which is on the north side, and he was crucified on the north side of the altar. In Israel, if you follow what they call the Dolorosa, which is the place where Messiah was supposed to have been killed, you follow him around somewhere and it's over on the southwest side, someplace over there. Couldn't possibly be. It does not match Scripture. The only place that matches Scripture and where he was crucified, it says there was a tomb nearby, which we know today is called the Garden Tomb. Garden Tomb is probably one of the few biblical sites in Israel not manned by the Catholic Church. That one's owned and run by the Protestants. I'm not sure which one charges the most money, but it,
It's free.
Oh, is it free to go in? Okay, that's great. In the word side, on the north side of the altar in verse 11, the word side is a number 3409. It's the word yerek in the Hebrew. It's a root, or the root of it is yarek. The word itself literally means the thigh. But the figurative sense of the word as a euphemism is referring to the generative parts. It means the loins as the seat of procreative power. You have to remember sometime the firstborn, the raised sheep, was also referred to as the firstborn of his strength. It was sometimes referred to the power, the creative power. The word northward, or north side, or northward, depending on King James or whatever, is the number 6828, and it's the word sophona. It's a form of sophone, and the word itself that's translated northward actually means hidden. Hidden.
Means hidden. North means hidden.
North means hidden. Now, if we think about it very carefully, there's other places in Scripture where it talks about Hasatan, the adversary. He said, I will be like the Most High. I will sit where? In the sides of the north. He said, I'm the one that's going to be hidden. In a lot of ways, he's and a lot of the things that have come down through us in various and sundry, Satan is the head of all of it, but he's hidden in it and people don't realize it.
And Yehoshua was hidden in these sacrifices.
He was hidden in all the sacrifices. But, when people look for him, then he says, I will be found by those who search for me with all their heart. If you're not searching for him, then he's hidden. Moses had a veil and they couldn't see, right? the glory of that which was going to be passing away. There was a glory that existed in the actual, ritual action of what was, given through His Torah, but there was also a glory that was hidden in that of the Messiah to come. The righteousness of the Torah, which comes from obedience, also teaches of the righteousness which comes through Messiah Yahushua. It tells us that in the book of Romans. So there is a righteousness from obedience, and then there is a righteousness from understanding. Go to Isaiah 49. In 2 through 5. Actually, we start in verse 1. Listen, O coastlands, to me. Remember, the word is translated coastland can also be translated as islands in the Hebrew. And take heed, you people from afar. That means everybody, doesn't it? Kind of reaching out to us over here. Yahweh has called me from the womb, from the matrix or the inward parts of my mother. He has made mention of my name. And He has made my mouth like a sharp sword. And the sword of the Spirit is what? The word of Yahweh. And when He comes back, He's got the sharp sword that goes out of His mouth, which is the word of Yahweh, which destroys. He has made my mouth like a sharp sword. In the shadow of His hand He has hidden me and made me a polished shaft. In His quiver He has hidden me. And He said to me, You're my servant, O Israel, in whom I will be glorified. You see that one right there is one that a lot of people in Orthodox Judaism use to say, oh, the servant of Yahweh is the nation of Israel, not one man. But it were. Remember, Israel was supposed to be a nation of priests, right? But the sacrifice to sanctify that nation of priests was going to be through one man. Okay? He said to me, You're my servant, O Israel, in whom I will be glorified. Then I said, I have labored in vain, I have spent my strength for nothing and in vain, yet surely my justice or my just reward is with Yahweh, and my work with El. And now Yahweh says, Who formed me from the womb, His servant, to bring Yaakov back to Him, so that Israel is gathered to Him, for I shall be glorious in the eyes of Yahweh, and my Elohim shall be my strength. Now all of a sudden, it's talking about whoever this person is to bring Israel back to Himself. Well, you can't choose Israel to bring Israel back. It's got to be one man to bring the nation back. Go to Ephesians 3. In Ephesians chapter 3 and verse 9. Well, actually, in verse 8 and 9, and this is the Apostle Paul, Rav Shaul, speaking, okay? And now we're beginning to get a little bit of his understanding here. In verse 8, he says, To me, who am less than the least of all the saints, this grace was given, that I should preach among the Gentiles, the nations, the unsearchable riches of the anointed of Yahweh, the Mashiach, and to make all see what is the fellowship of the mystery. Remember, the word mysterion means hidden truth, which from the beginning of the ages had been hidden in Elohim, who created all things through Messiah Yahushua. The beginning of it had been hidden in Him. Verse 10, to the intent that now the manifold wisdom of Elohim might be made known by the ecclesia, the called out ones, to the principalities and powers in the heavenlies, according to the eternal purpose which He accomplished in Messiah Yahushua our Master, in whom we have boldness and access with confidence through faith or trust in Him. What he's talking about is at the time after Messiah had come is when it was time to make known all the hidden truths that were given before up front. So everything that Paul was teaching and everything that Paul was writing in all of his letters is to help people to understand the hidden truth of Messiah written in the Scriptures. When they lost out on that, and when Christianity began to say, we're not going to have anything to do with that vermin, the Jews, did they begin to change everything so that nobody would ever have any association with them. So everything, remember, you can't separate Israel and Yehoshua. That's one of the problems in Isaiah 49. You have to understand when Messiah came of the tribe of Judah, he was part of the house of Israel, wasn't he? To bring the house of Israel back to himself, which is all of us. Well, when you try to take him out of that and then go make him a different type of Savior, and the Jews have been dumped, and now you got to have a different Savior to bring all the others back, and these are the ones that's replaced the house of Israel. You see that we see what's happened? But it's because there was never an understanding of Messiah and who he is in the Scriptures and what his purpose was. So you create something new. And unfortunately, a whole lot of people in the world have bought into that lie, so to speak. Go to Colossians chapter 1. Starting in verse 24. Remember we read the other day through Acts, you know, how Yehoshua chose Paul, and he said, you know, to show him the things that he must suffer for me. And you remember, you know, Paul did an awful lot of damage, you know, to his people. And remember when we talked about, you know, where he said to Paul, you know, it's hard for you to kick against the goads. What he's saying, it's hard for you to walk in disobedience to the divine impulse. Again, the divine impulse is all those things that's creating all these people who are turning and following him, and Paul was trying to destroy that. And it wasn't just one or two people. He was working against the entire move that Yahweh had going. In verse 24, Paul writes, and now, I now rejoice in my sufferings for you, and fill up in my flesh what is lacking in the affliction of the Mashiach for the sake of his body, which is the ecclesia. So there's a whole lot of things that's going to happen to him. Of which I became a minister according to the stewardship or the dispensation or administration. From a misunderstanding of that word is where we get all the doctrines through Christianity of so-called dispensationalism. And what it's talking about is at one time there was no law, and then was a dispensation of law, and then there's a law was done away with. Now we have a dispensation of grace, and they've tried to break this thing down into ages of time and give different words on it. It's all based on a misunderstanding of the word. What does to dispense mean? To pass out. Paul was given what? A ministry, and it was dispensed to him, and his ministry go reach the house of Israel scattered among the Gentile nations of the world. That was his purpose. Of which I became a minister according to the stewardship or the dispensation from Yahweh, which was given to me for you to fulfill the word of Yahweh. The mystery or the hidden truth which has been hidden from ages and from generations, but now has been revealed to his saints. Didn't say the whole world. To his saints. To them, Yahweh willed to make known what are the riches of the glory of this mystery among the nations, which is Messiah in you, the hope of glory. Him we preach, warning every man and teaching every man in all wisdom, that we may present every man perfect in the Mashiach Yehoshua. To this I also labor, striving according to his working, which works in me mightily. So again, we're talking about Messiah in us, each one of us, when we turn to him. It's only when you eat this word that became flesh that you have him in you. You reject all this word and you don't have him in you. In Colossians chapter 3, starting in verse 1. If then you were raised with the Mashiach. You see, when we were baptized, you know, that's what the symbolism was. We were, you know, immersed in baptism, symbolizing being, you know, in the tomb with him. Then we were raised up as into a new life. So if then you were raised with Mashiach, seek those things which are above, where Mashiach is sitting at the right hand of Yahweh. Set your mind on things above, not on the things on the earth. What is our mind fixed on? The things in the world, the things on the earth, or the things of Yahweh? It's supposed to be on him. Verse 3, for you died, and your life is hidden with the Mashiach in Yahweh. You see, if your mind is constantly on the things of the world, then you really didn't die with him. Verse 4, when the Mashiach, who is our life, appears, then you also will appear with him in glory. Therefore put to death your members which are on the earth, fornication, uncleanness, passion, evil desire, and covetousness, which is idolatry. You covet something, you know, and you covet something, and you desire, you want, I gotta have, and you all your efforts that you do are geared toward getting that, right? And he says that's idolatry, because that's what you're concentrating on, not Yahweh. There's a difference. And then he says in verse 6, because of these things, the wrath of Yahweh is coming upon the sons of disobedience. We don't realize sometimes how we bring so much of this stuff on ourselves because of what we do, what we choose to do. In verse 7, because of these, I'm going to read verse 6 and 7 as one. Because of these things, the wrath of Yahweh is coming upon the sons of disobedience, in which you also once walked when you lived in them. You lived in them once, you're supposed to come out of that. But so many times then we put creature comforts or whatever we think it is, you know, and then we can find ways of rationalizing, oh, well, this must be what Yahweh wants for me. It may be, but maybe that's not the way he wants you to get it. It's just like the sacrifices. He wants us to be saved, but he wants it to be done his way. Go back to Leviticus. In verse 13, we're reading there where it said, he shall wash the entrails and the legs with water, and the priest shall bring all and burn on the altar. It is a burnt sacrifice, an offering made by fire, a sweet aroma to Yahweh. That, talking about washing the entrails. The number is 7130. To wash means to wash. 7130 is the word translated entrails, okay? Actually, it's the word, the Vayikra, and it really means the center of. Literally or figuratively, it means the center of. Brown Driver Briggs says that the meaning for this word is the seat of thought and emotions. So washing the entrails, the inside, the center of the burnt offering, is a picture of all of us then cleaning ourselves up on the inside. Changing these thoughts and emotions. Got to get our thoughts and emotions out of the world and bring them into him. Bringing every thought is what it says in the New Testament into the what? Subjection to the Messiah and captivity. If we talk about he washes on everything, he washes the entrails and the legs. Go to John 13:10. See, when you wash the legs, it's actually, and legs from the Hebrew could also mean the feet. So when we read over here in John chapter 13, verse 10, the Passover, he washed their feet. Could be he washed the legs and the feet. Okay, I mean, we get the picture, right? You know, the feet are attached to, you know. But in verse 10, Yehoshua said to him, he who is bathed needs only to wash his feet, but is completely clean, and you are clean, but not all of you. He said you're already clean because of the word which I've given to you. All you have to do now is wash your legs and your feet. And what does that do? That's the path that you walk. You didn't have any shoes as long as you walked on set apart or holy ground. Your feet get dirty when they're in the world, not walking on holy ground. If you're walking outside the presence of Yahweh, then where you walk is not always clean. The path that he laid out, if you stay on that path, it's holy ground, right? And you continue to walk that way. You wash your feet to get on this holy path. What happens to get off of one side or the other? You get off in the world. And then somehow you got to repent, you got to wash, you got to get back on. But you're washed, you know, by him on the inside, right? And then we wash our feet or our legs, or we walk, or we change our way of life, or the way we walk. Bring it in line with him. And to be washed on the inside is to be what? Regenerated. I mean, some people we call it being born again, but it's actually a process of being regenerated. If we go back into Leviticus now, in verse 14 it says, and if the burnt sacrifice of his offering to Yahweh is a bird, it's still talking about the man. If it's, of his offering to Yahweh is of birds, then he shall bring his offering of turtle doves or young pigeons. The priest shall bring it to the altar, wring it off its head, or nip or chop off its head, and burn it on the altar. Its blood shall be drained out the side of the altar. That wring off is a translation. The Hebrew itself means to nip or cut, chop off. In verse 16, he shall remove its crop with its feathers and cast it beside the altar on the east side into the place for ashes. Then he shall split it at its wings. He shall not divide it completely, and the priest shall burn it on the altar on the wood that is on the fire. It is a burnt sacrifice, an offering made by fire, a sweet aroma to Yahweh. In verse 16, the word crop. Some Bibles may use the word craw. Crop or craw. Webster's gives you the definition of that word crop or craw as the first stomach of a fowl. But not all of them have it. It's only those who eat grain and seeds and so forth. You don't have a craw in a animal. It is a bird of prey. So it's the first stomach of a fowl. Chapter 2. The grain offering. When anyone offers a grain offering to Yahweh, his offering shall be of fine flour. He shall pour oil on it and put frankincense on it. This grain offering is going to actually be a memorial offering. We'll see that as we get down on into it. Verse 2, he shall bring it to Aaron's sons, the priest, one of whom shall take from it his handful of fine flour and oil with all the frankincense, and the priest shall burn as a memorial on the altar an offering made by fire, a sweet aroma to Yahweh. So it's not all of it, it's just a handful of it that's offered as a memorial. And the word memorial, there's the number 234. It's the word azkah, or azkarah. The word itself means a reminder. This azkarah comes from zakor, which is the number 2142, which is the root. But it's a reminder. Now, when you bring your grain offering as a reminder, what's it reminding you of? And you're going to burn it, so it's a reminder of the burnt sacrifice. And again, the burnt sacrifice is a picture of Yehoshua, so this is a reminder of that, and it's in the grain.
The food. The bread.
The bread sent down from heaven, okay? The word grain there is a number 4503. It's the word minkah. It means a donation or a... My goodness. Yeah, that's faster enough. I hope y'all are, Nah. Okay. Again, the word minkah means a donation. Tribute is usually bloodless and voluntary. That's why it's the bread offering, right? It's the grain mixed with oil and frankincense. Go back up. It should be a fine flour, oil poured on it, and frankincense on it, okay? Grain is also used in bread, right? Considered to be also the staff of life. The oil is used in anointing to be rubbed on, okay? Actually, you could say that if somebody's been anointed with Yahweh, it said that he's had something rubbed on him to do. You could put it that way. So the grain is the staff of life. Bread from heaven, he was the bread sent down from heaven. The oil is the anointing or the rubbing on of the breath, the word of Yahweh. And the word anointed, people don't ever think about this, but the word anointed also means consecrated. And a lot of people talk about, I'm being anointed, or I'm doing this or that, they do all that, but actually it really just means, in a literal sense, it means you're consecrated for something. Set apart for something. Maybe it's a job that you're supposed to do. And then the frankincense, and the word frankincense is actually the word Lebanon, L-E-V-O-N-A-W, Lebanon, kind of like Lebanon or Lebanon. You know, they say Lebanon, but it's Lebanon. The mountains of Lebanon become their whiteness, and frankincense is because of the whiteness of its smoke when it burns. And the word for frankincense is 3825. The word for oil there is 8081, and it means the oil of olives.
The number of frankincense again?
3825. 3825.
And oil?
Oil is 8081. You know, I think it's kind of fun too. Laban, you know, was the father of Leah and Rachel. Not the, anyway. And then the word flour there in verse 2 is the number 5560. It's the Hebrew word solet, like S-O-L-E-T, solet, which means to strip or to strip off. And its flour, it is a grain, the chaff, you know, which is the outer hull, stripped off or purified. So the outer covering is removed, and it's purified, and what's left then is the pure grain. Chaff goes away, and what's left is the pure. That's this fine flour that is the pure flour with the chaff, the covering removed. And in verse 3 it says this is a most holy offering, so to speak. Most holy of the offerings to Yahweh made by fire. And the word offering here is the number 801. It's interesting too, this is a feminine word. It's the word Isha. Isha. Now 801 is this Isha, which means an offering by fire. The number 802 is the word Isha, which means wife. A little bit of difference in the spelling, but it's pronounced the same, Isha. Both of them are feminine. You reckon he's looking for a pure wife?
Pure, spotless one.
A pure and spotless bride. I think that's kind of neat. When you remove the shaft, then the grain has been purified. Okay. Go to Luke 5. I hope everybody understands that I'm looking for Messiah and the bride and everything. Because I hope that everybody, that's where we all plan on being. And I think all of us are plan on being married to the same man. That's kind of a strange thought when you know, somebody say, oh, did you hear what he said? Yeah, well, take it out of context. But in Luke 5, in verse 34 and 35. Well, let's start in 33. So then they said to him, why do the disciples of John Yochanan fast often and make prayers, and likewise those of the Pharisees, but yours eat and drink? And he said to them, can you make the friends of the bridegroom fast while the bridegroom is with them? Man, if they're all there and you eat with the bridegroom, you think you ain't going to be happy and eating and drinking? You're not going to be fasting and trying to, you know what, make yourself be stricken while he's there. Verse 35, he said, but the days will come when the bridegroom will be taken away from them. Then they will fast in those days. You see, Messiah references the bride and the bridegroom. And even the words that he used when he gave them to Moses gives us a picture of this, the purification of everything. You go to Hebrews 9. In Hebrews chapter 9, verse 13 and 14. For if the blood of bulls and goats and the ashes of the heifer, sprinkling the unclean, sanctifies for the purifying of the flesh, sets it apart, how much more shall the blood of the anointed of Yahweh, the Mashiach, who through the eternal Spirit, or the eternal breath, or the eternal Word. The Word shall never pass away. That's the only thing that is totally eternal. Who through the eternal Spirit or breath or Word offered himself without spot to Yahweh, purge your conscience from dead works to serve the living Elohim, the living Creator. Messiah lives forever. And then go to Ephesians 5, we'll see it again. In verses 25 through 27. And he says, husbands, love your wives, just as the Mashiach also loved the ecclesia, the called out ones, and gave himself for it, meaning the whole group, that he might sanctify and cleanse it with the washing of water by the word, that he might present it to himself a glorious ecclesia, our glorious called out group, not having spot or wrinkle or any such thing, but that it should be holy and without blemish. He uses the relationship of man and wife to represent the union between the Messiah and the called out ones. Then go back to Leviticus chapter 2. In verse 4 and 5, he says, and if you bring as an offering a grain offering baked in an oven. Okay? And then he tells us, unleavened cakes of fine flour mixed with oil, or unleavened wafers anointed with oil. Unleavened means without leaven. The number is 7603. It's the Hebrew word seor. This is the word that means yeast.
7603?
7603.
Cakes.
Unleavened cakes of fine flour, unleavened. Unleavened, without leaven. That's the word 7603 in this passage. Seor. But remember, it means as swelling by fermentation. You have to understand, fermentation generally occurs when something, I hate to say it, but when something begins to rot. And when it begins to rot and break down, it begins to give off gases. And as it begins to give off these gases and this stuff begins to grow, that's the fermentation that takes place. This is not what happens with baking soda or baking powder. People begin to think baking soda, baking powder is the same thing as yeast, and it's not. It's a different process. If you just lump everything in there, they don't even, you can't have beans, because if you soak them in water, they swell up, and therefore you can't have them. If you mix plain old flour with water and let it sit for a few minutes, it begins to swell. Well, you can't have that either, right? That's why you'll buy packages of matzah, unleavened bread, and it'll have a big sign on it sometimes that says, not for Passover, because they waited longer than 18 minutes to mix it. Once you, put all the stuff together. All of a sudden, you've got all these rules and regulations in there because you lumped something together without ever really understanding what the process or what the purpose was in the first place. It's talking about fermentation, and fermentation, left alone, continues, and it causes spoilage, right? Well, what happens when Messiah said then, beware of the yeast of the Pharisees? He's saying beware of the false doctrines of the Pharisees, because once it's followed and you start doing it, it becomes in you and you become spoiled. Unleavened bread is what eating the doctrines of the truth and the purity of Messiah Yahushua. That's what it's all about. Getting the yeast out of your house, if you're not following the rest of it, it's not going to help you a whole lot. But if you go about it with the right attitude, when you start getting the yeast and everything out of your house, and then you begin to recognize that what you're doing is saying to Yahweh, help me get the false doctrines out of my life. What it's all about. And sometimes it's what we think, not what's written in a book on the shelf. Okay? Can make a lot of difference. Again, verse 4, if you bring as an offering a grain offering baked in the oven, unleavened cakes of fine flour mixed with oil, or unleavened wafers anointed with oil. But if your offering is a grain offering baked in a pan, or in a flat plate, or on a griddle, that's what that phrase means, shall be of fine flour, unleavened, mixed with oil. You shall break it in pieces and pour oil on it. It is a grain offering. In verse 6 there, that word grain is the number 4503. Verse 7, and if your offering is a grain offering in a covered pan, it shall be made of fine flour with oil. You shall bring the grain offering that is made of these things to Yahweh. And when it is presented to the priest, he shall bring it to the altar. Then the priest shall take from the grain offering a memorial portion and burn it on the altar. It is an offering made by fire, a sweet aroma to Yahweh. Remember, it's a portion for remembering. And this portion that's for remembering, that's being baked or burned in the fire, is still picturing and remembering, you know, the true sacrifice, which is offered up as a holocaust, as a total burnt offering. In verse 10, and what is left of the grain offering shall be Aaron's and his sons. It is a most holy offering of the offerings to Yahweh made by fire. It didn't say most holy about the animal that was burnt, but it does say it about this bread. Unleavened, it's pure. Purified, right? And remember, the animal sacrifice even had the fat in it, okay? And the fat, you know, in a lot of the other sacrifices, we had to remove the fat, and the fat's burned up on the altar, right? In verse 11, no grain offering which you bring to Yahweh shall be made with leaven. That number is 7557. For you shall burn no leaven nor any honey in any offering to Yahweh made by fire. No leaven and no honey. The word for honey is the number 1706. It's the Hebrew word divash. But there are two different words here for leaven. If you notice what we had before, what we got now is 7557 for leaven in verse 11. So there's no leaven burned, right, in the fire. That's what it's saying. Nothing can have leaven burned in the fire. Yet sin has to be burned up in the fire, correct? Okay? If sin is burned up in the fire, but leaven can't be burned in the fire, then leaven can't represent sin. Okay? And for years we've been taught that leaven represents sin, right? But it can't. So what does leaven represent? It represents doctrine, and we're told that when we get over in Luke, Messiah said it, beware of the leaven of the Pharisees. And then he said, oh, then there's mine, we're supposed to beware of the false doctrines. Okay. He became sin for us, right? On the altar of death. And death, and then sin was burned up. <clears throat> 2557. Did I say 7557 a while ago?
Yes.
2557
For what word?
for leaven.
Oh, for leaven.
Is,
a long time ago, I got 7557.
that's correct. But there's another one, it's leaven, it's number 2557.
Which one is two?
Well, in verse 11 there, it's the number 7557.
And the second one is 7603 in that same verse.
Yeah, burn no leaven is 7603, right? That's that word sehor, which we had before. Okay?
Which means unleavened?
Leaven is.
Sehor is a word translated for yeast. No leaven, no yeast of any kind. And it's because, the sehor, the yeast, the 7603 number, is causing or having an offensive smell or becoming rotten or bringing about putrefaction. Not so much the different words and the different numbers, but it is the concept of what leaven and yeast is all about and what it produces. And this is what he's trying to stop, okay? What I'm trying to say is if somebody's eating biscuits and they got baking soda in them and they swell up a little bit, is that what he's talking about? Because baking soda or baking powder, either one, don't cause this putrefaction. You understand what I'm saying? I mean, there's always somebody coming back later on. Well, does that, because on the label it says, baking soda is leaven. Well, just because they call it leaven doesn't mean that's what it is based on what the Bible says. Go to Matthew 16. In Matthew chapter 16, in verses 5 through 12. And when his disciples had come to the other side, they had forgotten to take bread. Then Yehoshua said to them, "Take heed and beware of the leaven or the yeast of the Pharisees and the Sadducees." I don't know what number that would represent because that's in Greek. It's not going to match up with what we got in Hebrew. Beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and the Sadducees. And they reasoned among themselves, saying, "It's because we've taken no bread." It's like he's saying, don't eat the bread of them Pharisees. But when Yehoshua proceeded, he said to them, "O you of little faith, why do you reason among yourselves because you have brought no bread? Do you not yet understand or remember the 5 loaves of the 5,000, how many baskets you took up, nor the 7 loaves of the 4,000, how many large baskets you took up? How is it you do not understand that I did not speak to you concerning bread, but you should beware of the yeast of the Pharisees and Sadducees?" Then they understood that he did not tell them to beware of the leaven of bread, but of the doctrine of the Pharisees and the Sadducees. Doctrines, false doctrines. False doctrines followed will lead you into sin. Right? If you're following something and it's not exactly in line with what the Word says, then it's wrong. I don't care what anybody thinks. Go to Luke 12. In Luke 12 and in verse 1, he said, "In the meantime, when an innumerable multitude of people had gathered together so that they trampled one another, he began to say to his disciples first, 'Beware of the leaven or yeast of the Pharisees, which is hypocrisy.'" And what is hypocrisy? If you go back, hypocrisy, go back into the ancient Greeks, the word itself means what? The voice out from under the mask. In Greek theater plays and so forth, they had on a mask to represent things, and the mask didn't mute, but they always had a voice coming out. And sometimes the voice didn't always match the mask. Go back to Matthew 23. In verses 1, 2, and 3. Then Yehoshua spoke to the multitudes and to his disciples, saying, "The scribes and the Pharisees sit in Moses' seat." They are what? Moses was the teacher of Israel. The scribes and the Pharisees now hold that position, and they are the teachers, right, of Israel. And he's saying, therefore, in verse 3, whatever they tell you to observe, they're teaching Torah, observe and do, but do not do according to their works, for they say and do not do. You teach what the Bible says or what Torah says, and that's what people are supposed to do, but don't go out doing like they do. There's a lot of people out there trying to teach the Bible, but they're not doing it. If somebody is out there teaching, supposedly, the Torah of Yahweh and not living it, then what does that make them? Pharisees. Who are the true Pharisees today then? There's places in there, Messiah said, "What right have you got to have my law or my Torah in your mouth, seeing as how you hate my words and cast them behind your back?" What right have you got then to have my Torah in your mouth? If he's saying they have no right to have the Torah in his mouth, okay? Then what are they bringing upon themselves when they're supposedly trying to teach the Torah, but they're not doing what it says do? Go to 1 Corinthians chapter 5. 1 Corinthians chapter 5. verses 1 through 8 in this chapter. You know, it's kind of funny here when he's talking about it, because here we have people in a group who have somebody within their group who's really not doing what they're supposed to do, and the people are not upset about it, and they're all laughing about it. What does he say in verse 1? It's actually reported there is sexual immorality among you, and such sexual immorality is not even named among the nations or Gentiles, that a man has his father's wife. And you're puffed up and have not rather mourned. Puffed up means what? You're proud of it. And have not rather mourned, that he who has done this deed might be taken away from among you. For I indeed, as absent in body but present in spirit, have already judged, as though I were present, concerning him who has so done this deed, as present in spirit. His word is there because he wrote this letter to him. In the name of our Master, Yehoshua the Mashiach, when you are gathered together along with my spirit, my word, with the power of our Master, Yehoshua the Mashiach, deliver such a one to Satan for the destruction of the flesh, that his spirit may be saved in the day of Yahweh Yehoshua. For the destruction of the flesh. Does that mean that deliver this one up to death? Kind of like what it says, doesn't it? That he may repent, and in his spirit be saved. Verse 6, he says, your glorying is not good. Do you not know that a little leaven leavens a whole lump? See what he's saying? Actual leaven put in bread makes all of the bread what become leavened or rise up. And he's saying, don't you recognize the fact that if you maintain this little bit of yeast, this little bit of leaven, this little bit of corruption in your group, it will spread and the whole group will become corrupted on account of it. That's what he's saying. Verse 7, therefore purge out the old leaven, that you may be a new lump, since you truly are unleavened. For indeed Mashiach, our Passover, was sacrificed for us. Therefore let us keep the feast. Paul is talking about keeping the feast. I'll guarantee you Christianity today don't keep the feast. Or if they do it with puffed up bread and something else, or whatever. Therefore let us keep the feast, not with old leaven, nor with the leaven of malice and wickedness, but with the unleavened of sincerity and truth. The yeast of purity and truth. The pure doctrine. That's what it's all about, Messiah. That's what the Feast of Unleavened Bread is all about. The truth of Messiah. Getting rid of the leaven, the yeast in your house, saying, I'm getting rid of the false doctrines in my life. If you're not, then you're living a lie anyway, even if you go through the motions. It's not real. Go to Proverbs chapter 4. In Proverbs chapter 4, in verses 1 through 4. This is Solomon. You know, most all the Proverbs were written by King Solomon. In Proverbs chapter 4 and verse 1 he says, hear, my sons, the instruction of the Father, and give attention to know understanding. For I give you good doctrine, do not forsake my law. When I was my father's son, when I was the son, my father David is what he's talking about here. Tender and the only one in the sight of my mother. Solomon's mother was who? Bathsheba. And Bathsheba, as far as she was concerned, she said to David, didn't you promise that my son was going to become the king? And David had promised, didn't he? And he took steps to make sure it happened. So he's saying, when I was my father's son, tender, and the only one in the sight of my mother, he also taught me and said to me, let your heart retain my words, keep my commands, and live, or have life. You remember when David was dying on his deathbed, he charged Solomon to do what? Show yourself a man and keep the commandments of Yahweh. I'll guarantee you that our world today and our society doesn't teach that the mark of a man is keeping the commandments of Yahweh. What is the mark of a man in our society? How much beer he can drink, or how much booze he can drink, or how many women he can go with, or how many laws he can break? I mean, commercials on television get to the point now where they're advertising stuff saying, look here, you know, if you'll cheat somebody or lie to them or do this, then you can get what you want. That's a sick society, is it not?
He who dies at the most always wins.
Yeah, he who dies the most always wins. Go to Acts chapter 5. Starting in verse 24. I mean, here I am, I'm trying to teach the Torah and the understanding of the meaning, and we're talking about the sacrifices and everything that are given, you know, and try to get the understanding of the meaning and look toward Messiah Yehoshua. And yet here in the book of Acts, which everybody talks about, oh, well, see, that's the New Testament church. We have a new everything, right? And here in Acts chapter 5, beginning in verse 24, Luke is writing, now when the high priest, the captain of the temple, and chief priests heard these things, they wondered what the outcome would be. Then one came and told them, saying, look, the men whom you put in prison are standing in the temple and teaching the people. The ones you put in prison. The society put them in prison for teaching the things of Yahweh. And then he's saying, look at here. They're standing in the temple and teaching the people. Verse 26, then the captain went with the officers and brought them without violence, for they feared the people lest they should be stoned. And when they had brought them, they set them before the council. And the high priest asked him, saying, did we not strictly command you not to teach in this name? They must have been hearing the name in order to say that. And yet the name is never mentioned anywhere in our English translations of the so-called New Covenant. And look, you have filled Jerusalem with your doctrine and intend to bring this man's blood on us. He's saying you're trying to make us responsible for this man's death. Hello? They were responsible, wasn't it? Verse 29, then Peter and the apostles answered and said, we ought to obey Yahweh rather than men. How many people today feel that way? How many people say, oh, well, yeah, that's true, but then they go right off and do what they want to do and forget obeying Him? They're giving lip service. Then Peter and the apostles answered and said, we ought to obey Yahweh rather than men. The Elohi of our fathers raised up Yehoshua, whom you murdered by hanging on a tree. They murdered him, but he was hung on a tree, but it was Yahweh's plan for that to be done, but because of our sin. We all responsible for the death of Messiah. Verse 31, him Yahweh exalted, his right hand, chief and deliverer, to give repentance to Israel and forgiveness of sins. Who did he come for? The lost sheep of the house of Israel. Somewhere along the line, somebody came up with some doctrines and tried to hijack the truth of Yahweh's word. And did a pretty good job. How many today are truly following the Torah and looking to Messiah for our deliverance? In verse 32, and we are His witnesses to these things, and so also is the Holy Spirit, the set-apart breath, the Word whom Yahweh has given to those who obey Him. When you obey, you begin to understand this word, this breath, right? If you're not obeying it, do you ever get any understanding of what the Word's saying? If you're not obeying it, then what spirit are you listening to? Who knows? But it's not the word, the breath, or the spirit of Yahweh. Go back into Leviticus, but remember, corrupted doctrine brings sin to the one following it. Sin brings death. Can I say that again? Corrupted doctrine brings sin to the ones following it. Sin brings death. Everything we do should be as unto Yahweh. And unto Yahweh, and recognizing that our reconciliation has been established with us to Yahweh through what the Son did, Messiah Yehoshua. Okay? The whole thing is to reconcile us back to the Father, what it's all about. The Messiah said, no one comes to the Father but by me. And if you don't study the Torah to find out who Yehoshua is, he said, no one comes to the Father but by me. And then he said, many are going to come to me in that day. And I'm not trying to be anti-compassionate or anti-social or angry with anybody, but Messiah said in more than one place, in that day, many are going to come to him and say, we did this and we did that and cast out demons. He's going to say, depart from me. I never knew you, you who practice lawlessness or transgression of the Torah. If I was to say anything to anybody about what you're supposed to do is anything other than being obedient to the Torah, then I would not be showing compassion for people. But when you're trying to tell people what you really need to do is start walking in obedience to what this word says, regardless of anything else or what you think, okay? You're not doing people a service by saying and patting them on the back saying, no, that's okay, you just go on and do what you want to do, and Yahweh going to love everybody, because after all, Yahweh is just love, and you can just go out and sin all you want to, and you're still going to go to heaven. And that's what's being taught in the world. I'm not doing somebody a service by saying those things. If I sound like I'm angry when I'm saying these things, because I have a deep, passionate belief that what Yahweh said He means. And not just for me. But whether you do it or whether you don't, that's not my job to make sure you do it. But I would be remiss if I didn't say that this is what Yahweh's Word says. And it's up to you to take it from there. I will help you to understand it.
Keep
Best I
reminding
can.
us.
Excuse me?
Keep reminding us.
Okay, I'll remind. Okay. Going back to verse 12, in chapter 2 of Leviticus. As for the offering of the first fruits, you shall offer them to Yahweh, but they shall not be burned on the altar for a sweet aroma. Word first fruits there is the number 7225. It is the word Reshit. 7225 is the word for first fruit. There it's not Bikarim, it's Reshit. Where do we find this word Reshit? Go to Genesis chapter 1. I know, a lot of y'all have already heard all this, so you're just going to have to be patient and sit through it with those who haven't heard it yet. There's a newbie here, I've just been told. In Genesis 1:1, in the beginning, that's the word Reshit, 7225. Reshit, in the beginning, in the newborn, in the first fruits.
In the sun.
In the sun.
S-O-N.
Elohim created the heavens and the earth. Yeah, S-O-N, not S-U-N. Go to Genesis 49. You know, you'd be amazed sometime if a person just pick a word, go through and look at it in all the different places that you can find it in Scripture, and then look at how many things you're being taught through that one word in all those different places. Genesis 49 and verse 3. Reuben, you are my Reshit, my firstborn. Well, see, if Reshit then can be translated as firstborn, then if you go back to Genesis 1:1, in the Reshit, in the firstborn, He created all things. And who was the firstborn from the dead? Messiah Yahushua. In verse 3, you are my firstborn, that's 7225, Reshit.
1060. 1060 to that beginning is the first.
Excuse me, Reuben, you are my firstborn, my might, the beginning of my strength. I'm right, you're right. The word beginning is the number 7225, not firstborn. But he's saying that the firstborn is the beginning of his strength, the Reshit. It's still referring to the firstborn as the beginning. But you're right. The word beginning is 7225. And actually it means the first of my effort. And Messiah Yahushua is the firstborn of many brethren. Go to Deuteronomy 21. If you might listen for that other telephone, because I think somebody's trying to call in on this line. And if anybody can hear me, if somebody tried to call in, it might be trying to knock out the sound, and somebody may need to call it if we need to have to call back in on the conference line. But in Deuteronomy 21, in verse 17, this whole thing is about the difference between the firstborn son of two wives. He's not saying that it's okay to have two wives, but he's just saying if you have two wives and each one gives birth to a son, and if you loved one wife and hated one, which is exactly the situation that existed between Leah and Rachel with Jacob. And remember, nearly everything in the Torah is written is based on the life that was lived before that time. And he's saying in verse 17, he shall acknowledge the son of the unloved as the firstborn by giving him a double portion of all that he has, for he is the beginning, the reshit of his strength. The right of the firstborn is his. And he's saying, if you have two eyes, he don't say that you should, but he said, if you do and you like one and hate the other, and if the son of the one you don't like is the actual firstborn, then you give him his due, regardless of what you feel about anything else. When Reuben lost the birthright because of what he did, then the birthright went to who? The son of Rachel. It went to Joseph, the firstborn of the other wife. Go to Psalm 78. In Psalm 78, in verse 51, this is referring back to the Passover. And he destroyed all the firstborn in Egypt. Bikur, the first reshit, the beginning of their strength in the tents of Ham. They're talking about all these descendants then that were in Egypt, and he said he destroyed all the firstborn in Egypt, right? All the sons of Ham. There are other places he said, I gave men for you. We think about, the lamb and the blood that was on the doorpost and was shed for all of us, and we understand that as a picture of Messiah Yahushua, the blood, of the lamb, Messiah dying for us. But we forget also that all the firstborn of Egypt died. And he said, I'm going to go through, I'm going to kill all the firstborn, man and beast. Anybody then who wasn't protected or gone in the house under the blood died. The blood is what prevents the death. The one that shed the blood then is the one who can restore eternal life, which was lost in the first place by Adam when he sinned. When Adam rebelled against Yahweh's word, it was the first sin. And what happened? Eternal life was lost and death came. Sin started. All kinds of things, We can fuss about it all we want to, and what he did to us. But we can repent and accept what Messiah Yahushua has done and be restored back to the Father and be walking towards that eternal life, which is what his plan was in the very beginning. So even though Adam may have sinned, Yahweh has found a way to what? Reconcile or restore us back to him. And if he is the Word, then where is your eternal life? In the Word. If the Word lives in you. What if it don't? We set aside that Word sometime because our thoughts and desires and our attitudes make us want to choose the ways of the world as opposed to what that Word says. We try to reconcile it sometime and try to make, the Word says this, but then doing this out here in the world, this is okay and it's the same thing as. No, it ain't. We cannot reconcile or rationalize things out of existence, although people try in so many ways. Okay, going back into Leviticus then. In verse 14 he says, if you offer a grain offering of your first fruits to Yahweh, that's 1061, Bikur, you shall offer for the grain offering of your first fruits green heads of grain roasted on the fire, grain beaten from full heads. The first fruits of the green heads of grain, right? First fruits, 1061, Bikurim. The word there, green heads of grain, isn't it funny that that's the number 24? That's the Hebrew word aviv, or abib as they say. Isn't it funny here they translated it as what it really meant. In all them other places they put a capital A on it and make it like it's the name of the month.
Yeah.
And it's not. You shall offer for the grain offering of your first fruits green heads of grain. You're offering the abib. Isn't it funny? In the first month of the year is the month when the green heads come up, and the first offering to Yahweh has to be what? First fruit, the green heads of the barley harvest. The word itself also has a literal meaning which means to be tender. That kind of like means do not harden your heart. Be tender. Go to Leviticus 23. In verse 17. This is at the festival known as Pentecost, or Shavuot, or the Feast of Weeks, which takes place in the summer. And in verse 17 he says, "You shall bring from your habitation 2 waves of 2/10 of an ephah. They shall be of fine flour. They shall be baked with leaven, the first fruits to Yahweh." That's of the wheat harvest. And yet Messiah was the first fruits, the barley harvest, which is done on day of first fruits during the Feast of Unleavened Bread. But then it says he was the what? Firstborn of many brethren to come. And there again we have the festivals, you know, in line with the first fruits and then the wheat harvest. And Messiah, when he's here, he said, look at the harvest, is it not what? Right? So everything concerning Yahweh has been associated with the agricultural seasons, which include all the festivals. I guess, you know, most everybody's noticed that around here lately I've been doing a lot of planting of plants and so forth, you know, and having a good time. And I was looking out there the other day, I had some in my hand, I was looking for a place to plant, and I said, you know, these things, I got to put them somewhere where they can get lots of light and water. And then all of a sudden it comes back to us. What do we got to have to grow? We got to have light and water. And it's the water of the Word. And the light is Messiah Yehoshua. And yet those same 2 things, in a literal sense, the light and the water is what he gave to cause everything else to grow from the earth. We're right out of the earth. And then in the parables, you know, he planted a garden. And what did he plant in the garden? He also planted people along with all them trees and herbs and everything. Yeah. He planted them in the garden. And as long as they had continued to feed on Yahweh and the light and the water, okay, but they started looking for something else. Instead of the Creator as being the food source, where'd they go? They got to eat what he created and begin to what he created, all of a sudden everything else was lost. Isn't that something? It's kind of a simple little picture, isn't it? But if we begin to realize everything that we do in our life is in reality, what takes place is the story of Yahweh's Word. That's why in Romans he can say every man is without excuse, because they all know, because what? Creation shows them the same thing that his Word is saying. Go to Hosea chapter 9. In verse 10. So interesting here in verse 10 of Hosea 9 and through Hosea. And remember the name Hosea, the number is 1954, and it means deliverer. The last king of Israel was known as Hosea, the deliverer. It's a picture of the one who's going to come, Yehoshua, which name means what? Yahweh is deliverer. In verse 10 he says, I found Israel like grapes in the wilderness. I saw your fathers as the first fruits on the fig tree in its first season. They went to Baal Peor. They went to the Lord of the opening and separated themselves or dedicated themselves to that shame. They became an abomination like the thing they loved. You become like what you worship. Can you see Yahweh in you? Can you see Yahweh in your life? Can you see Yahweh in the things that you do? Do other people see Yahweh in who we are and what we do? Boy, that's a tough question to answer. It really is. Go to Romans 8. In verse 23. Now in this particular passage in chapter 8, he was talking about all of creation groaning and laboring with birth pangs, you know, waiting. And at the time he was talking about this, who were they waiting for? They were waiting for the one who should come. They were waiting for the Mashiach to come. And then in verse 23 it said, and not only they, but we also who have the first fruits of the Spirit. Now wait a minute, who is the first fruit? Messiah Yehoshua? He's the Word made flesh. So he's the first fruit. What was the very first word in Genesis? Bereshit. In the beginning, in the first fruit. The beginning of his strength, the beginning of everything. In him everything was made, and there was nothing created that he didn't make. So who is the beginning of all things? Yehoshua. Go to 1 Corinthians chapter 15. In verses 20 through 23. But now Mashiach is risen from the dead and has become the first fruits of those who have fallen asleep. Literally in the Greek it said those who have died. For since by man was death, by man also is the resurrection of the dead. Adam, the man, brought death. So Yahweh became the man and brought back the resurrection from the dead. That's not really a hard concept to get a hold of, I don't think. For in verse 22 it says, for as in Adam all die, even so in the Mashiach all shall be made alive. If you die in Adam, what did you die from? Because he did what the serpent said do instead of what Yahweh said do. It's really simple. Verse 23, but each one in his own order, the Mashiach, the first fruits, afterward those who are the Mashiachs at his coming. You know, it's really a kind of a hard thing, and I can understand this. It's kind of a hard life for us to live, dedicated to Yahweh, living in this world, which is dedicated to who? Hasatan. He's the God of this world, the system of this world. It doesn't take very much to look out in the world and see how much of this world is going to exist. Messiah comes back, what are the things that he's going to do away with? I mean, isn't that something to think about? Go to chapter 16 here in 1 Corinthians and look at verse 15. Paul's writing to these people here, and in verse 15 he says, I urge you, brethren, you know, the household of Stephanus, that it is the first fruits of Achaia, and they have devoted themselves to the ministry of the saints. You know, there's a lot of these people back then, and what they were devoted to was just furthering the others that had been called to do specific things. And these then had devoted themselves to support those in their endeavors. Throughout Scripture, there's said, you know, one waters, right? Or one speaks the word, one waters the word, and another one reaps, right? But they're not all doing the same thing, but yet each one is going to receive the same reward in their part of this whole thing, which is getting the truth out to Yahweh. Anybody who's speaking something other than words of Moses in Torah are speaking what? Lies. If you're listening to people who are teaching words other than what Moses said, who are you listening to? Messiah said, okay, and the Torah teaches us when Moses came down, whenever he spoke, the people come around and he had to cover his face with a veil because they couldn't stand the glory, right? And then the Scriptures tell us that even today, in the reading of the Torah, the same veil lies over the hearts of the people in reading the, what, Torah. But the minute they turn to Messiah Yehoshua, then the veil comes off and they can see Yehoshua in the words of Moses. But that's only when you turn to him and begin to look for him in that word. I don't think that, as simple a concept, I don't think there's very many people out there in organized religion that would ever believe that you can see Yehoshua in the words of Moses in the Torah. But isn't he there? Because Messiah said in the volumes of Moses, it's written of me to do what? Do your will. Y'all know what he said? Okay. Enough of that. Go back to Leviticus. We were reading in verse 14, if you offer a grain offering of your first fruits to Yahweh, you shall offer for the grain offering of your first fruits green heads of grain, the abib, roasted on the fire, grain beaten from full heads. Messiah was beaten. I mean, if you just look at the context of everything, he's the first fruits, he was beaten. He was the first one offered before all the others. In verse 15, you shall put oil on it and lay frankincense on it. It is a grain offering. Then the priest shall burn the memorial portion, the reminder. You know, we're going back now. The memorial portion of this grain offering was to remind you of what? The burnt offering, the burnt sacrifice, the whole thing. Of its beaten grain and the part of its oil with all the frankincense as an offering made by fire to Yahweh. The memorial portion is the portion that's burned. Chapter 3. When his offering, who is the his referring to now? It's going back to the man who's bringing something. We can't ever forget it's an individual who's bringing whatever this is a sacrifice of a peace offering. If he offers it of the herd, whether male or female, he shall offer it without blemish before Yahweh. Word peace there is the number 8002. It's the word shalem. Kind of sound like shalom. It's kind of in that close in there. It's a sacrifice and thanks. In reality, it represents fellowship or partnership with Yahweh by or after the removal of sin. You see, sin separates you. Okay? So then this grain offering is after the sin is removed, then it's an offering, you know, in thanks of fellowship. And fellowship means what? Partnership. Not socializing. I don't think Yahweh is going to socialize with people, you know, if they are deliberately rejecting everything he's come to do. In the Pentateuch, there for those of you who are in page 415, it's talking about this peace offering, or another word for peace offering would be a thank offering, shalem, you know. A sacrifice made in fulfillment of a vow or in gratitude for benefits received or expected. You know, people make a deal with Yahweh and say, oh, if you'll do so-and-so, I vow that I'll give you so-and-so. But if you do that, he said, you better make sure you do what you say, otherwise you'll be found a liar. It's thus an occasion when man seeks and obtains peace with his Creator. In the peace offering, there was inherent a feeling of joyousness, either in celebrating a happy occasion in the people's life or some important event in connection with a family or an individual. A lot of times, peace offerings were made, you know, on the birth of a child or something great happened in their life, so they would, you know, thank offering or peace offering, you know, giving thanks to Yahweh. Unlike a burnt offering, a peace offering could be either male or female. And only a small part of the peace offering was burned on the altar. All the rest, with the exception of portions reserved for the priest, was eaten by the offerer, his kinsman, and guest at a solemn meal which followed the offering of the sacrifice. It promoted the feeling of solidarity in the nation or family and also pointed to dependence upon Yahweh for protection and for all the blessings of life. I think that's pretty, you know, when you stop and think about what has kept the Hebrew people, what we call the Hebrew people, the Jews, what has kept them separate from the rest of the world all their life? Following the instructions of Yahweh. We go back when we're reading, you know, in the book of Esther. And one of the first things that Haman said to King Ahasuerus, he said, there's a people in this land who have their own set of laws. My word's not there. But he's saying they're going by their law, not yours. And in reality, if they're following Yahweh's laws, they're obeying the law of the land. Unless it goes against Yahweh. Aren't we told to obey the law of the land? Somebody asked me about that yesterday or today or sometime. It's in there somewhere. Okay. Chapter 3. In verse 2 he says, and he shall lay his hand on the head of his offering and kill it at the door of the tabernacle of meeting, and Aaron's sons, the priests, shall sprinkle the blood all around on the altar. Where did these sacrifices have to be offered and killed? At the door of the tabernacle, right? Keep that in mind. Verse 3, then he shall offer from the sacrifice of the peace offering an offering made by fire to Yahweh, the fat that covers the entrails and all the fat that's on the entrails. Always somebody wants to know, well, can I eat this fat or I can't eat that fat, or which kind of fat can I have and what can I not eat? And everybody's trying to figure out what kind of fat they can eat and what kind they can't. Does everybody know that there is a certain amount of fat in beans? You can't get rid of all the fat, so, we have to understand what's what. Here it says, then on the peace offering, the fat that covers the entrails and all the fat that's on the entrail, the 2 kidneys and the fat that is on them by the flanks. Does that mean the kidneys are supposed to be offered? And the fatty lobe attached to the liver above the kidneys he shall remove. Is that not, that's not talking about them little flecks of fat out there in the meat that you can eat, is it? I'm just making these remarks so people begin to see that he is specifically. And Aaron's son shall burn it on the altar upon the burnt sacrifice, which is on the wood that is on the fire, as an offering made by fire, a sweet aroma to Yahweh. He's going to burn the peace offering upon the altar, upon the burnt sacrifice. The burnt sacrifice is up there, and this other going to go on top of it. You ever notice that? That one goes on top of the other? I just did. Which is on the wood that is on the fire, as an offering made by fire, a sweet aroma to Yahweh. So it's all the fat covering the inward parts, the 2 kidneys and the fat that's on them, the fat attached to the liver, and the word kidney is the number 3629. It is ha-hula-ayot. I didn't say that probably right, but it's feminine plural anyway. The figurative meaning of the word is the mind as the interior self. Isn't that something? You offer that then, because remember, in the Hebrew, talking about people, having the right stuff, they got the chutzpah, they got the the intestinal fortitude, they got the guts, they got whatever you want to say. Down in those inner parts, the interior self, referring to the mind. The battle is always in the mind. We can decide, oh, we're not going to eat that fat stuff. Oh, we're not going to eat that pork. Oh, we're not going to eat them shrimp. We're not going to eat them lobsters, Oh, I'm not going to work on Saturday. But then all of a sudden in the day-to-day decisions of life, when the world is pulling and pushing you one way and the Word is saying something else, which way do you go? And then we kind of rationalize. That's where the battle comes in, is in the mind. When somebody first starts trying to make up their mind they're going to observe the Sabbath, and all kind of things begin to happen, and their car breaks down and they get sick or whatever, you can't do it. But when you finally figure out that, no matter what, you're still going to, observe the Sabbath, and start tackling some other way. And it starts out in those little day-to-day easy things, and once you overcome those, then the hard part is in the mind. But if it can ever keep you away from understanding where that real battle really is, you got you whooped, and it's in the mind. That's why he talks about what? Keeping everything, as frontless between your eyes. Keep this word before your face at all times. Stay in this word. That's where your life is. You get out of the word, what happens? Start eating dirt. Okay. Okay. In verse 3, then he shall offer from the sacrifice of the peace offering, an offering made by fire to Yahweh, the fat that covers the entrails and all the fat that's on the entrails. I told you the word kidney is the number 3629. And it's feminine plural, and the figurative meaning is the mind is the interior self. Go to Matthew chapter 16. I had to go back and redo that and say it all again because I talked so much in between times you might have forgot what we were talking about. Not that I talk a lot. In Matthew 16, starting in verse 24 through 26. Yehoshua said to his disciples, if anyone desires to come after me, let him deny himself and take up his staros, his stake, and follow me. Now notice Messiah sitting there saying this. He hadn't gone to the execution stake yet, has he? But he's talking about taking up your stake, talking about, crucify those things, put to death. It's exactly the same things that the sacrifices we're talking about. For whoever desires to save his life will lose it, and whoever loses his life for my sake will find it. It's hard for a man to decide, hey, boy, if I give up this world, the things of this world, I'm not going to lose a bunch of stuff. Well, what is it you're willing to trade for eternal life? Do what?
She says it's already 2 hours, and I said he's not talking very fast.
Now talking slow. Verse 26, for what is a man profited if he gains the whole world and loses his own soul? That's what it comes down to. What do you want? The world or Yahweh? He created the world. And when you're worshiping the world, then you're worshiping something that was created by him. It's the same thing as eating the apple. And rejecting the commandments of Yahweh. Isn't it funny? The first sin of disobedience had to do with something to eat. Okay. Go to Ephesians chapter 2. You ever notice that there are certain books of the New Testament that seem to fit more? You get a lot more in Ephesians, from Leviticus than other things, In Ephesians chapter 2, verse 11 through 14. Therefore remember that you, once Gentiles in the flesh, word Gentiles is 1484 there, who are called uncircumcision by what is called the circumcision made in the flesh by him. See, those who were circumcised, called all them Gentiles out there who were uncircumcised, but remember a whole lot of people that they were calling uncircumcised was really the house of Israel, who had refused to be circumcised and gone out in the world. They didn't want to be like Yahweh's people. They wanted to be, so they became the world. Verse 12, that at that time you were without the Mashiach, being aliens from the commonwealth of Israel and strangers from the covenants of promise, having no hope and without Yahweh in the world. You realize the word Gentile means one without God, without Yahweh. Mm-hmm. And yet all the people run around there saying, oh, I'm a Gentile believer. You're a believer in what? If it's not Torah, they don't have Yahweh, do they? And yet if you accept Messiah Yehoshua and you become part of the commonwealth of Israel, you can't separate yourself from Israel. Isn't that what he says in Isaiah? Don't any of you Gentiles out there say, oh, that Yahweh has totally separated me from his people. That's not true. Verse 13, but now in Messiah Yehoshua, you who once were far off have been made near by the blood of Mashiach, for he himself is our peace, who has made both one and has broken down the middle wall of division, having abolished in his flesh the enmity, the law of commandments and ordinances, so as to create in himself one new man from the two, making peace, and that he might reconcile them both to Yahweh in one body through the execution stake, thereby putting to death the enmity. What was the enmity? He separated the house of Israel from the rest of the nation because of their sins, right? And he knew that a lot of those Gentiles were going to grow up. They were actually Israel, whether they knew it or not. He knew who it was. And then he told what? All the followers then, you don't go out taking wives or associate with people from another nation. Kind of separate the house of Judah and the house of Israel. But now he's bringing them back together, making one out of the two. But if you don't know who that is out there, but if you don't believe what Messiah said when he said, I have been sent only to the lost sheep of the house of Israel, and people go around out there saying, oh, well, he came now and he's done away with the Jews now and he's picked the Gentiles. It doesn't fit with what Scripture says. Of course, we couldn't all see it, back when. Go back to Leviticus. Verse 5, and Aaron's son shall burn it on the altar upon the burnt sacrifice, which is on the wood that is on the fire, as an offering made by fire, a sweet aroma to Yahweh. One stacks upon the other. If his offering is a sacrifice of peace offering to Yahweh, as of the flock, male or female, he shall offer it without blemish. If he offers a lamb as his offering, then he shall offer it before Yahweh. And he shall lay his hand on the head of his offering and kill it before the tabernacle of meeting, and Aaron's son shall sprinkle its blood all around on the altar. Then he shall offer from the sacrifice of the peace offering as an offering made by fire to Yahweh its fat, the whole fat tail, which he shall remove close to the backbone, the fat that covers the entrails, and all the fat that's on the entrails, the 2 kidneys and the fat that's on them by the flanks, and the fatty lobe attached to the liver above the kidneys he shall remove. And the priest shall burn on the altar, kind of like incense, the food of the offering made by fire to Yahweh. That word food there is the word lechem, representing the blood. I mean the flesh. All of it points back to Messiah Yahushua. And the word made flesh. And all the fat belongs to who? Yahweh. It's his. He took all the fat just like he's taking all of the sin. A lot of ways you might say, well, then can I say the fat represents sin? Could be. Verse 12, and if his offering is a goat, then he shall offer it before Yahweh. He shall lay his hand on its head and kill it before the tabernacle of meeting, and the sons of Aaron shall sprinkle its blood all around on the altar. The sons of the light bringer shall sprinkle its blood all around on the altar. Then he shall offer from it his offering as an offering made by fire to Yahweh, the fat that covers the entrails and all the fat that's on the entrail. You reckon he's trying to get us, as many times as he tells us this, he's trying to get us to understand exactly what it is we're supposed to do? You know, you can't be speaking vaguely and repeat it 3, 4, 5, 6 times. The 2 kidneys and the fat that's on them by the flanks, the fatty lobe attached to the liver above the kidneys he shall remove, and the priest shall burn them on the altar. Food, lechem, bread, an offering made by fire for a sweet aroma. All the fat is Yahweh's. Verse 17. A perpetual, I mean temporary, right? A perpetual statute, la'olam. Throughout your generations, in all your dwellings, you shall eat neither fat nor blood. Now, the perpetual statute, is it the sacrifice, or is it not eating the fat and the blood? It's not eating the fat and the blood, because he tells us you're going to dwell many years without the sacrifice and so forth, but the other you can still do. You can't have no more kidney pie. I'm not that I ever ate any, but I mean, perpetual statute. All the fat is his. The fat burned on the altar. Blood was poured out on the altar. Messiah shed his blood for the remission of sin. He became sin for us. Sin went away on the altar. Fat the place of sacrifice. Go to Luke 11 in verse 30. There again, I'm still saying, you know, if X equal this equal that, then they have to be the same thing. It's a way of, you know, you prove Scripture, you know, you prove Scripture with other Scripture, right? In Luke 11, in verse 30, for as Jonah became a sign to the Ninevites, so also the Son of Man will be to this generation. What was the sign of Jonah? Jonah became a sign of life after he repented. When he ran from doing what Yahweh called him to do, and then Yahweh caught up with him, right? But he ran and took a boat in Joppa, right? Got out to sea and everything became rough and everything, and finally the people on the boat, they went in there and they talked to him. They knew who he served because he told them, it said. And they said, what are we going to do with you? We got to get this storm, you know, we're all going to be dead. And he said, you ain't got one choice, throw me overboard. Throw me in the water. So he went in the water, and then there was a great fish, wasn't a whale. It was a fish that swallowed him up, right? And then he went down in the depths, you know, picture of death, and then he what? Got thrown back up on the land. It's a picture of what? Resurrection life. But he had to have repented first, and if you go back and study what his prayer was, you know, he repented on the way down. Okay? And then Yahweh heard, and he pulled him back. And he said, you know, this generation, look at verse 29, this is an evil generation that seeks a sign, and no sign will be given to it except the sign of Jonah the prophet. You keep on wanting to see a sign, and the sign you get might not be what you want. I mean, stop and think about that, okay? And yet everybody wants a sign that says what I'm supposed to do. How come they just can't take what the Word said and go do it? But that's what it bounds, you know, comes down to. The Word says it, you just do it. Why? Because the Word said it. So what? Do it. It's not that hard to understand. Go to 2 Corinthians 5. In verse 21 it says, for he, referring to Yahweh, made him, referring to Yehoshua, who knew no sin, sin for us, that we might become the righteousness of Yahweh in him. The righteousness of Yahweh. What is the righteousness of Yahweh? It's His Word. His Word is righteousness, right? Then it said what? If we do all this Word, then it becomes righteousness for us. Well, this Word, righteousness, became flesh. The Word, in obedience to it, is a righteousness, and obedience to that Word teaches us of the righteousness that's going to come through Messiah Yehoshua. Still pretty simple. Took a long time to understand it, but it's, you know, it's really pretty simple.
Yeah, that's simple.
And then go back to Matthew 26. I always wind up going to Malachi. But in Matthew 26, in verse 28, I don't know how many people realize, but there's a lot of so-called messianic teachers out there today who are teaching that we're not in the new covenant yet. And I'm sure some of you may have heard that teaching before by different people that, you know, well, we're not going to be in the new covenant until Messiah comes. But in Matthew 26, verse 28, Messiah held up a cup. What was in the cup? The fruit of the vine. I mean, people can argue about whether it was grape juice or wine or whatever. I mean, but I think it was wine. But whatever you want to believe, it's still the fruit of the vine. The blood of the grape. And he said, for this is my blood of the new covenant. Word new is 2537. That word new means new. But the word covenant means what? Disposition. So this is what? This is my blood of the new disposition, which is said for many for the forgiveness or remission of sin. So evidently there was another type of blood being shed for sins before this one. That was the shed blood of the animals, right? But they could never do away with the sin, it tells us in Hebrews, otherwise they wouldn't have had to keep doing them. But he held this up before it happened. And he's saying that what was in this cup was his blood. Was it really his blood? He hadn't died yet, so it was symbolic. When people miss that, then they follow these doctrines that say, oh, well, the priest has the right to say a little prayer, and this really becomes his blood, and the wafer really becomes his flesh, and, you know, all these kind of things. We've all heard the stories and the jokes and the horror stories about what happens if a little child takes the bread or the drink, you know, and throws up and goes on the floor. And all kinds of things come up from that, okay? There could be no horror stories associated with it when it's the truth and you understand the truth itself and forget all the other stuff. Go back to Genesis. I mean Leviticus. Well, we go back to Genesis here in a few more months, but
Hopefully not.
Verse 17. I want to repeat that so everybody understands what the perpetual statute is. Throughout your generations. Are there still any generations of the people left that he was talking to at that time? Well, is this statement then still in existence? In all your dwellings you shall eat neither fat nor blood. That don't mean I can do it in a cafe. It's talking about wherever you exist, wherever the land is. It's not necessarily just in your house, but I can do it in your house. See, we can switch houses. You come eat it in mine, I eat it in yours. Isn't that a way of trying to get around things? Isn't that what people do? And look how many ways people look to try to get around the word of Yahweh and try to, distort or make it mean something else, just so they can do what they want to do. Chapter 4. This talk about the sin offering. Now Yahweh spoke to Moses, saying, Speak to the sons of Israel, saying, If a person sins unintentionally against any of the commandments of Yahweh, and anything which ought not to be done, and does any of them. I think everybody's Bible has that word unintentionally in there. That means you didn't mean to do it. Okay? You didn't do it on purpose. It worked deliberate. Verse 3, If the anointed priest sins, bringing guilt on the people, then let him offer to Yahweh for his sin which he has sinned a young bull without blemish as a sin offering. You might say this is a corporate thing for all the people. You see, the sin of the nation had to be cleared, and then the individuals can partake of what has been cleared for the whole nation. So this whole sin offering for the people is who? It's the sons of Israel. Not Waxahachie or whatever. Verse 4, He shall bring the bull to the door of the tabernacle of meeting before Yahweh, lay his hand on the bull's head, and kill the bull before Yahweh. Then the anointed priest. It's funny, this word anointed is the Mashiach, or not HaMashiach, but just Mashiach, the anointed of Yahweh. It's the anointed priest of Yahweh. Anointing can be to anybody, not necessarily just the Messiah himself. Unless it has the specific article, HaMashiach, it's not referring to the individual. The priest was anointed, the kings were anointed, anybody can be anointed. That's what it talks about in the New Testament. Can be anointed or set apart or consecrated to a particular task. Then the anointed priest shall take some of the bull's blood and bring it to the tabernacle of meeting. The priest shall dip his finger in the blood and sprinkle some of the blood 7 times before Yahweh in front of the veil of the sanctuary. And the priest shall put some of the blood on the horns of the altar of sweet incense before Yahweh, which is in the tabernacle of meeting, and he shall pour the remaining blood of the bull at the base of the altar of the burnt offering, which is at the door of the tabernacle of meeting. You got the altar outside, which was the one that everything was burned up on. You got the altar inside, which is where the incense was. The sin offering, as well as the prayers and everything of the saints, is all done under the blood of Messiah Yehoshua. And it's all done in the presence of Yahweh, who is what? The testimony in that box on the other side of that curtain. The only one that separated the two was that veil. The white curtain of righteousness, the white linen, with the cherubim embroidered on it. And then, we're told that when that curtain was rent, that separation there, it said was what? The flesh of the Messiah. And all the cherubim that was embroidered on that, and he said it, that represents people, and if we were with him. And again, the cherubims that were molded in the lid on the ark, 2 of them, the 2 houses, the house of Israel and the house of Judah, and all those associated with it. Now in verse 8, of the sin offering, he shall take from it all the fat of the bull as a sin offering, the fat that covers the entrails, and all the fat which is on the entrails. Again, it's the same description we have on all the other animals. The 2 kidneys and the fat that's on them by the flanks, the fatty lobe to the liver above the kidneys, he shall remove, as it was taken from the bull of the sacrifice of the peace offering, and the priest shall burn them on the altar of the burnt offering. But the bull's hide and all its flesh with its head and legs, its entrails and offal, that means all the waste product that's still inside, is burned Verse 12, the whole bull he shall carry outside the camp to a clean place where the ashes are poured out, and burn it on wood with fire. Where the ashes are poured out, it shall be burned. We have the advantage today of going back to look in that apostle or the letter that was written to the Hebrews. And it talks about this bull that was killed and everything and burned outside the camp. And it said, we go outside the camp to meet Messiah Yahushua. He's not in the camp, is he? Why not? Because the house of Israel rejected him. When he came, they rejected him. Millions of lay people accepted Messiah Yahushua, but they were ostracized by the leadership. When you start trying to go to the leadership today and what they're trying to tell you, you think they're going to point you back to the Torah to try to follow? No, we got a different Messiah today. We got a new God, is what it amounts to. New doctrines that they're looking for you to follow. Just make a note, Hebrews 13 verses 11 through 13 is what refers to this, in chapter 12 here, verse 12. But again, notice in verse 13, now if the whole congregation of Israel sins unintentionally or in ignorance, and the thing is hidden from the eyes of the assembly, and they have done any of the commandments of Yahweh which should not be done, and are guilty. Notice it says that they don't even know they did it, but they've done it. They're still guilty whether they know it or not. That's kind of, a lot of people say, oh, well, it's not wrong if you don't know it.
No excuse.
And people believe that. But in verse 14, when the sin which they have sinned becomes known, then the assembly shall offer a young bull for the sin and bring it before the tabernacle of meeting. The assembly, the whole group. You might say that these people are all in this together. If we consider ourselves part of the children of Israel, right, then are we in it with them? When did the ecclesia begin? When he called them out of Egypt. Those are the people that he promised to Abraham he was going to call out and give his covenant to. We're still part of those people, and he's still calling us to come out of Egypt, and the covenant he's wanting to give us is the covenant of Torah. But he's telling us it could never be what? The sins removed by the blood of animals. It had to be a Messiah Yahushua. And we're supposed to be learning the Torah so that we can accept Messiah Yahushua. Does that mean this is all done away with? Or does it mean Messiah Yahushua is still fulfilling what this called him to do because he is the high priest? Isn't it funny, all of Leviticus is talking about through the priests and the high priest and what they're supposed to do. And the high priest ministered to the people who would come to the priest to have their sin removed.
It's actually
Right.
reinforced.
Excuse me?
It's actually reinforced.
Yes, reinforced. Actually, it's established, not even reinforced, but it's actually established for truth through the Messiah Yahushua. But that's good. Now in verse 15, and the elders of the congregation shall lay their hands on the head of the bull before Yahweh, then the bull shall be killed before Yahweh. The elders, that's more than one man. Yeah, the elders of all the 12 tribes. There were 70 of them that Moses chose. Took a while for all 70 to put their hands on the head of this bull. But it shows that all are part of what's fixing to take place. Verse 16, the anointed priest shall bring some of the bull's blood to the tabernacle of meeting. Then the priest shall dip his finger in the blood and sprinkle it 7 times before Yahweh in front of the veil. And they shall put of the blood on the horns of the altar which is before Yahweh, which is in the tabernacle of meeting. He shall pour the remaining blood at the base of the altar of burnt offering, which is at the door of the tabernacle of meeting. He shall take all the fat from it and burn it on the altar. And he shall do with the bull as he did with the bull as a sin offering. Thus he shall do with it. So the priest shall make atonement for them, and it shall be forgiven them. Then he shall carry the bull outside the camp and burn it as he burned the first bull. It is a sin offering for the assembly. Now in verse 22, we have a little different category here. When a ruler has sinned. You see before, verse 13, now the whole congregation sinned. Now in verse 22, when a ruler has sinned and done unintentionally against any of the commandments of Yahweh, Elohei, in anything which should not be done, and is guilty, or if his sin which he has sinned comes to his knowledge, he shall bring as his offering a kid of the goats, a male without blemish. And he shall lay his hand on the head of the goat and kill it at the place where they kill the burnt offering before Yahweh. It is a sin offering. The priest shall take some of the blood of the sin offering with his finger, put it on the horns of the altar of burnt offering, and pour its blood at the base of the altar of burnt offering. And he shall burn all its fat on the altar, like the fat of the sacrifice of peace offering. So the priest shall make atonement for him concerning his sin, and it shall be forgiven him. Now in verse 27, we have a different person involved here. If anyone or any soul, nephesh, of the common people or the people of the land sins unintentionally by doing any of the commandments of Yahweh, which ought not to be done, and is guilty. What land do you suppose he's talking about? It's the land of Israel, because all of this is to be done when they go into the promised land, the land of Israel. Verse 28, or if his sin, which he has sinned, comes to his knowledge, then he shall bring as his offering a kid of the goats, a female without blemish, for his sin which he has sinned. And he shall lay his hand on the head of the sin offering, and kill the sin offering in the place of the burnt offering. Then the priest shall take of its blood with his finger, put it on the horns of the altar of burnt offering, and pour all the blood at the base of the altar. He shall remove all its fat, as fat is removed from the sacrifice of peace offering. Notice how each one compares to the other. And the priest shall burn it on the altar for a sweet aroma to Yahweh. So the priest shall make atonement for him, and it shall be forgiven him. The priest is the one that's doing these things and makes atonement for the one who brings. If he brings a lamb as his sin offering, he shall bring a female without blemish. Then he shall lay his hand on the head of the sin offering, and slay it as a sin offering at the place where they kill the burnt offering. The priest shall take of the blood of the sin offering with his finger, put it on the horns of the altar of burnt offering, and pour all the blood at the base of the altar. If you stop and think about it, and I know it gets repetitive to go through and read all these verses, but the altar is always the same. The altar is where sin is removed. The fat goes on the altar. The blood goes on the base. The blood is also sprinkled on before the mercy seat. I mean the lid of the ark. That's a hard habit to break, you know. But all of the things that you come back and look at, each component of each one of them still points to what Messiah himself has done. It sounds very, very complicated, but in reality it's really pretty simple. You know, without the shedding of blood, there is no remission or covering of sins. And through the animal sacrifices, there was a covering, and it was a substitutionary to when Messiah should come and actually remove it. So the total thing then, not new covenant, but new disposition. We have a different disposition of sin between the old and the new. And he tells us in Hebrews, he came to establish the second and did away with the first. Talking about the animal sacrifice replaced by his. It is still the disposition of sin. And the covenant of one and all the rules and regulations taught of what the Messiah was going to do when he came. To establish. Everything was established up front. Verse 35. He shall remove all its fat, as the fat of the lamb is removed from the sacrifice of the peace offering. Then the priest shall burn it on the altar, according to the offerings made by fire to Yahweh. So the priest shall make atonement for his sin that he has committed, and it shall be forgiven him. Chapter 5. Verse 1. As we go through this chapter 5, this is kind of a series of different types of sins that people can do. Okay, not, you know, but look how many of these things today has taken on a different context or understanding in our society. And I'm not trying to talk about society of any other nation, of any other country, because I don't live under them and don't know what their rules are anyway. But we all live here, and we're supposed to follow the rules of the land, right? Up to a point. Verse 1. If a person sins in hearing the utterance of an oath and is a witness, whether he has seen or known, if he does not tell, he bears guilt. Our society today said, oh, this guy is a squealer, he's a rat. Right? Stool pigeon, whatever. And yet we go back to the book of Esther, and did Mordecai overhear the people in the gate plotting to kill the king? And what did he do? He went and told the king about it, right? Which is what the Torah says you're supposed to do. Then later on, when the king, you know, couldn't sleep for some reason, and he was asking, and he found in reading the Chronicles, he found that this had happened, you know, and he said, what's been done for this Mordecai? And they said, nothing. So he decides that he wants to honor him. Why was he honored by the world? Because of his obedience to the Torah. And in the Proverbs, we're told that if we obey the Torah, then we'll find favor not only in the eyes of man, but in the eyes of Yahweh for our obedience. We are so afraid, though, of what the world can do to us sometimes, that we decide, oh well, I gotta appease the world. I can't appease Yahweh. And we go through all kinds of ways of rationalizing it, to make it fit. So in reality, then, what today the society calls a snitch or a tattletale, in reality is really the act of a righteous man. Doesn't it, say in the last days he'll call bad good and good bad? Isn't that what we're doing? And that's what's happening today. Verse 2, or if a person touches any unclean thing, whether it's the carcass of an unclean beast, or the carcass of unclean livestock, or the carcass of unclean creeping things, and is hidden from him, he also shall be unclean and guilty. There's a difference between unclean and sinning, You're unclean. Now notice, going through the Torah, we haven't yet been told what to eat and not to eat, have we? But he's talking about he shall be unclean. And he's talking about the carcass of an unclean beast, or the carcass of unclean livestock, or the carcass of unclean keeping things, and is hidden from him. What would be unclean livestock? We haven't been told yet what's clean and unclean, have we? We don't get into that until we get in Leviticus 11. But I think it's interesting that the words that are written here and the words that Moses put down, I'm sure because Yahweh said, write these words, and that's what he wrote. He's getting ready to explain a lot of the things. But a lot of the things that he wrote down at this time, even they didn't have an understanding for. It comes from what? Knowing and knowing him and doing what the word says do. Without the doing, there is no understanding. Verse 3, or if he touches human uncleanness, whatever sort of uncleanness it is with which a man may be defiled, and it is hidden from him, or he is unaware of it, when he realizes it, then he shall be guilty. You may not be guilty at the time, or you may not know it, but it still happened, and then when you find out what it is, then you're guilty, and that's what you have to what? You have to atone for it. Or if a person swears, speaking thoughtlessly with his lips, none of us here would ever speak thoughtlessly, would we? That was a lie, wasn't it? If a person swears, speaking thoughtlessly, person can be male or female. You can't blame that one just on the sons. With his lip to do evil or to do good, whatever it is that a man may pronounce by an oath and is hidden from him, when he realizes, then he shall be guilty in any of these. And it shall be when he is guilty in any of these that he shall confess that he has sinned in that thing is implied. And he shall bring his trespass offering to Yahweh for his sin. That's the same with the guilt of the trespass offering. For his sin which he has sinned, a female from the flock, a lamb or a kid of the goats of the sin offering. So the priest shall make atonement for him concerning his sin. If he is not able to bring a lamb, then he shall bring to Yahweh for his trespass which he has committed 2 turtle doves or 2 young pigeons, one is a sin offering and the other is a burnt offering. There's a reason if you can't get a hold of a lamb, or anything else, not because you're too poor to buy them, but maybe because they're all dead and you can't find one that's acceptable, so you have to go with something else. Don't always make the mistake that so many are taught over in New Testament scriptures when Miriam, took the turtle doves up and then thought, oh, well, she was too poor. Remember, the wise men had brought them gifts of frankincense, myrrh, and gold. They weren't poor. But if this was what? Getting ready for a Passover, the Feast of Unleavened Bread, the birth of Messiah, the death of Messiah and everything. But when he was christened, at his birth at Sukkot, how many animals would have been offered as sacrifice during that period of time? I mean, you got thousands of them, right? It might have been kind of hard to find a little old perfect lamb, or something else. Maybe they don't, Verse 8, and he shall bring them to the priest who shall offer, which is for the sin offering first, and wring off. Remember, we looked at the word wring, and it means to nip off or chop off, not wring it off like they do, so many ways today, and think it's funny to watch it run around without a head. They shall nip or chop off from his neck, but shall not divide it completely. Then he shall sprinkle of the blood of the sin offering on the side of the altar, and the rest of the blood shall be drained out the base of the altar. It is a sin offering. And he shall offer the second a burnt offering according to the prescribed manner. So the priest shall make atonement on his behalf for his sin which he has sinned, and it shall be forgiven him. The person brings the sacrifice. The priest is the one that makes the atonement for him. We go to Messiah Yahushua as our high priest, and he what? He makes atonement for us. But we have to what? We have to receive and accept the sacrifice that he's done. And it's through that he can then what? Act as our high priest. I would submit to you today, most people don't have any idea what the purpose of the priest is. Verse 11. But in keeping with that, they all say, oh yeah, we're supposed to be a nation of priests, but they don't have any idea what it means. But if he is not able to bring 2 turtle doves or 2 young pigeons, then he who sinned shall bring for his offering 1/10 of an ephah of fine flour as a sin offering. He shall put no oil on it, nor shall he put frankincense on it, for it is a sin offering. Then he shall bring it to the priest, and the priest shall take his handful of it as a memorial portion, a reminder. Reminder portion, what was it for? A reminder of the burnt offering and what it's all about. And burn it on the altar according to the offerings made by fire to Yahweh. It is a sin offering. I would submit to you there's a lot of ministries out there in the world today, and a lot of them have some doctrines they're teaching now of Messiah didn't have to die to remove our sin. There's a lot of ways that you can have your sin removed. You know, you can do this thing with offering money. You can buy your, redemption with silver, or you can bring this turtle dove, or you can bring this. And they're saying there's lots of ways a person can be saved. Didn't have to be Messiah. And yet all of those things picture Messiah. It's obvious then that they can't see the Messiah in those things if they're saying that he didn't have to die. The truth is, if the Torah could be removed or done away with or changed, and all Yahweh had to do was change the Torah, then he didn't have to die. But then nobody would. Yeah. But he had to die because the Torah, the law, cannot be broken, cannot be changed. In verse 13, the priest shall make atonement for him for his sin that he has sinned in any of these matters, and it shall be forgiven him. The rest shall be the priest as a grain offering. And verse 14, we're talking about the trespass over here. Then Yahweh spoke to Moshe, saying, if a person commits a trespass and sins unintentionally in regard to the holy things of Yahweh, have you noticed how many times he's used the word unintentionally? Has he ever given us a sacrifice for deliberate sin? If you stop and think back in all of the scripture, go back into Kings and Chronicles and so forth, where the people, when they sinned, and he'd send a prophet down to tell them to repent and turn back in obedience. Whenever they didn't, and he sent them out of the land, they were captured or whatever, taken captive or whatever. And it was wherever they were, if they would repent in their heart then, and confess their sin, right? And repent and turn back in obedience to Yahweh's word, he brought them back to the land, right? They didn't start making sacrifices where they were. Sacrifices could only be accepted where? At the door of the tabernacle. It was when they would being brought back to the land, then they would begin to celebrate the festivals and observe the sacrifices and things that they would do again in the land. I think that's important to understand. Again, in verse 15, if a person commits a trespass and sins unintentionally in regard to the holy things of Yahweh, then he shall bring to Yahweh as his trespass offering a ram without blemish from the flocks, with your valuation in shekels of silver, according to the shekel of the sanctuary as a trespass offering. And he shall make restitution for the harm that he has done in regard to the set apart of the holy thing, and shall add 1/5 to it. 1/5 is what? 20%. And give it to the priest. So the priest shall make atonement for him with the ram of the trespass offering, and it shall be forgiven him. If a person sins and commits any of these things which are forbidden to be done by the commandments of Yahweh, though he does not know, yet he is guilty and shall bear his punishment. Isn't that something? A lot of people today may be bearing the punishment for some sin that they did, don't even know about. But they're still what? They're still guilty and bearing the punishment for it. One of the things we need to get before Yahweh, and say, hey, forgive me for it and show me what it is. I cannot do it again. I think he can show you very clear what it is if we listen. We may not want to believe it. We may think, oh, that can't be it. But he'll show us if we're willing to see. In verse 18, he shall bring to the priest a ram without blemish from the flock, with your evaluations of trespass offering. So the priest shall make atonement for him regarding his ignorance in which he erred and did not know, and it shall be forgiven him. It is a trespass offering. He has certainly trespassed against Yahweh. A ram with the silver to make restitution was this offering, right? If we think about it today, the ram, the ram was what the ram caught in the thicket. For Abraham. And Messiah said, Abraham saw my day and rejoiced, right? He's saying that he saw looking down the road, right? And then the silver, which is the money that was paid, 30 pieces of silver. But in this trespass offering, a ram and the silver valuation of the priest, a sign that Messiah has also paid for the damage that sin causes. You ever thought about that? Our sin affects a lot of people. Our sin affects, family members. Our sin can affect friends. It can affect all kinds of people.
Make us sick too.
It can make it sick. It can make all kinds of things happen. So the silver and the redemption. In chapter 6, covered a lot of ground today, and so much of it is repetitious. But in verse 1, Yahweh spoke to Moses, saying, if a person sins and commits a trespass against Yahweh by lying to his neighbor. Now wait a minute, if I lied to my neighbor, that's not against Yahweh. But this says it is, doesn't it? So if a person sins and commits a trespass against Yahweh by lying to his neighbor about what was delivered to him for safekeeping, or about a pledge, or about a robbery, or if he has extorted from his neighbor. This is talking about people supposedly belong to Yahweh, and yet they do this thing. Verse 3, or if he has found what was lost and lies concerning it and swears falsely, in any one of these things that a man may do in which he sins. All these things he's mentioning, are interactions between people, and yet he's saying that it's wrong. If it's a sin, it's against Yahweh. Stop and think about it for just a minute, okay? If we treat every person that we come in contact with as if we were talking to Yehoshua, would we say the things that we say? Would we feel the feelings that we feel? Would we think some of the things that we're thinking? But I can't do that. That jerk, he's something else. I can't do, But he doesn't put conditions on it. What someone else does is not a reason for you to operate against Torah. That's not your place. What somebody else does or doesn't do is not justification for what you do. Our choice is to obey Torah, and Yahweh doesn't say you're supposed to obey Torah if everybody else does. Does he?
You never do it.
No. But he says that when he comes, will I find people on the earth trusting Yahweh and his word? That's the question he asks. It's one-on-one. If we ever really get a hold of the idea of the understanding, that redemption between us and Yahweh is a one-on-one personal thing. He's going to accept corporately, okay? But there's only going to be a remnant. The scriptures in the New Testament tell us, what if a righteous man scarcely be saved? Where is the sinner? If the righteous man scarcely be saved, well, that'll scare the pants off of people.
These are instructions to the chosen people.
Instructions for the chosen people, that's right. Those who obey then are going to be the ones who are chosen, and that's a very small remnant. I don't care what many people think. Over a period of time, in the last few thousand years, there'll probably be a multitude who have been, and we can know that. But in each generation, there's only been a what? A small bunch. Okay, verse 4. Then it shall be, because he has sinned and is guilty, that he shall restore what he has stolen, or the thing which he had deceitfully obtained, or what was delivered to him for safekeeping, or the lost thing which he found, or all that about which he has sworn falsely. He shall restore its full value, add 1/5 more to it, that's 20%. and give it to whomever it belongs on the day of his trespass offering. You go back and look at this, and then go back and look at Malachi and see what Yahweh says to those people about you robbed from me or stolen from me. And they say, in what way? And what did he just describe all these trespass offerings and so forth to be, the sacrifices? Weren't they supposed to be perfect, without blemish and all these kind of things? And Malachi says, what were they bringing him? Lame and blind, broke. It's something you wouldn't even use for yourself. You bringing it to me, and then he's saying, in what way have we robbed you? Go back and look at that. And then go back and look at ourselves and think, if all of this Torah is the same today as it was when he gave it to Moses, then the only difference is between the sacrifice Messiah did and that animal. Everything else is exactly the same. Which means the sin is exactly the same. Okay? Verse 6. And he shall bring his trespass offering to Yahweh, a ram without blemish from the flock, with your valuation or your appraisal as a trespass offering to the priest. So the priest shall make atonement for him before Yahweh, and he shall be forgiven for any one of these things that he may have done in which he trespasses. In all cases, the sin is still the same sin, yesterday, today, and forever. Messiah did not break any of the Torah when he was here, and therefore he was a spotless, right? And he could be our sacrifice. The question is he still alive? Okay? Has he changed his nature? So if he didn't break the Torah, then he'll never break the Torah in the future. If he lives in us, would he expect us to break the Torah? So keeping the Torah is just important today as it was yesterday and will be in the future. There's no difference. Forever, la'olam, to the vanishing point. It's always the same. That concludes your readings for this day in the Torah. Verse 7. Go with me to Acts chapter 10. Oh boy, is that not a chapter that's distorted by an awful lot of people? I was hoping to get through chapters 10 and 11 today in the book of Acts. So y'all may have to listen quicker. Okay? But in Acts chapter 10, if anybody's looking, that's right after chapter 9. That's just so people wake up, you know. Verse 1 of Acts chapter 10. There was a certain man in Caesarea called Cornelius, a centurion of what was called the Italian, we got the word regiment, cohort, group of soldiers. Now, if he was the Italian, what's another word for Italian? Roman. Does that mean this guy was a Roman soldier? But he was a good guy. You'd be surprised sometime where you find him. Verse 2, a devout and one who feared God. They got God here. The one who feared Yahweh in the Greek, there was a term there, they were called sibomenoi, which is translated would be God-fearers. They had a fear of Yahweh. I would submit to you, a lot of these people had a fear of Yahweh is something that most people today who claim to follow Torah don't have. If they did have that true fear of Yahweh, then what and Yahweh said, don't fear those that can kill you, and after they kill you, they got nothing else they can do. The one you better fear is the one that can kill you, and after he killed you, throw your soul into hell for all eternity. That's the one you better have a fear of. But people don't have that fear. We've been taught for so many years, oh, Yahweh's not going to send anybody to hell. Yahweh's not going to send anybody to this. Yahweh's not going to do that. No, Yahweh sent his word. If you break it, then you go and you pay the penalty for that breaking, or you repent and turn back in obedience to be cleared. One of the two. It's your choice. But he was a devout one who feared Yahweh with all his household, who gave alms or gifts generously to the people and prayed to Yahweh always. About the 9th hour of the day, 3 p.m., if anybody's keeping 3 p.m., ninth hour of the day, he saw clearly in a vision an angel of Yahweh coming in and saying to him, Cornelius. Before we go on, the ninth hour of the day, about 3 p.m., Messiah said there's 12 hours in the day and 12 hours in the night, right? So the ninth hour is 3 p.m. That would make the 12th hour at what time? So if it was 12 hours in the day, then that meant the day started at what time? 6 to 6. So the night would start at 6 to 6. That's not really too hard to figure out, is it? Verse 4. And when he observed him, he was afraid and said, what is it, master? I mean, he's saying, he saw this, an angel of Yahweh. What is it, master? So he said to him, your prayers and your alms have come up for a memorial or a remembrance before Yahweh. Now, wait a minute. We've just been reading about sacrifices that were all done, and each one of those things had a portion of it that was a memorial or a reminder or remembrance. And here was this man who'd been doing all these things. I wonder, your prayers and your alms, your gifts have come up, as a memorial, as a reminder. This man was probably walking in more obedience than those who claim to be of the Son. You understand what I'm saying? And then this angel of Yahweh says to Cornelius, now send men to Joppa and send for Simon, whose surname is Peter. He is lodging with Simon, a tanner whose house is by the sea. He will tell you what you must do. Does anybody know what a tanner is? One that prepares skins and hides for other uses, clothing or shoes or whatever they're going to make out of these things. Verse 7, and when the angel who spoke to him had departed, Cornelius called 2 of his household servants and a devout soldier from among those who waited on him continually. This man had people at his beck and call. So when he had explained all things to them, he sent them to Joppa the next day as they went on their journey and drew near the city. If y'all can remember when we were in Israel, we were at Caesarea Maritime, which is there on the coast of the Mediterranean. And Joppa is just up the coast from there, about a day's journey, I guess, maybe 20 miles or so. It's not really all that far, but if you're walking, it's more than 30 minutes, But the next day, as they went on their journey and drew near the city, Peter went up on the housetop to pray about the 6th hour. That would make it around what? Noon. See how easy it makes it when you understand them 9th hours and everything? Then he became very hungry and wanted to eat, but while they made ready, he fell into a trance. He kind of went into kind of half sleep, right? But he's hungry. If you're hungry, what are you thinking about? Think about eating something, right? And saw heaven opened and an object like a great sheet bound at the 4 corners descending to him and let down to the earth. And in it were all kinds of 4-footed animals of the earth, wild beasts, creeping things, and birds of the air. Reckon there's any unclean animals in there? As we're reading this, think about every nation in the world, including Texas. Hey. But they have their own national bird, they have their own national animal, their own national flower, or their own national this or that or whatever. And they all have their own symbol which they use to represent themselves, right? And nearly all nations of the world have as their symbols unclean animals and birds. And the voice came to him in verse 13, rise, Peter, kill and eat. But Peter said, not so, master, for I have never eaten anything common or unclean. Now, the book of Acts is many years after the death, burial, and resurrection of the Messiah, right? And how come Peter at this point in time has still never eaten anything common or unclean? Because he knew he wasn't supposed to. And he's still resisting it, even though that's what it sounded like these words were coming from Yahweh, Yehoshua, to tell him to go eat something. Verse 15, and a voice spoke to him again the second time, what Yahweh has cleansed or declared clean, you must not call common or unclean. This was done 3 times, and the object was taken up into heaven again. Now while Peter wondered or was perplexed within himself what this vision which he had seen meant, behold, the men who had been sent from Cornelius had made inquiry for Simon's house and stood before the gate. these men, these soldiers, these Roman soldiers that had come to call on him were trying to bring him to come to the house of a Roman man, right? He was a man of a different nation, different people, right? And they called and asked whether Simon, whose surname was Peter, was lodging there. While Peter thought about the vision, the Spirit, the breath, the Word said to him, "Behold, 3 men are seeking you." Isn't that amazing? If you realize the Spirit is the Word, then he heard the Word say. He heard the Word which said, "Behold, 3 men are seeking you." Does that not make it easy to understand? "Arise, therefore, go down and go with them, doubting nothing, for I have sent them." He sent some of these Roman common people to come get Peter. Then Peter went down to the men who had been sent to him from Cornelius and said, "Yes, I am he whom you seek. For what reason have you come?" And they said, "Cornelius, the centurion, a just man, one who fears God, a Sibomenoi, and has a good reputation among all the nation of the Yehudi, was divinely instructed by a set-apart angel to summon you to his house and to hear words from you." If he's going to be imparting the words of Yahweh, he's going to be imparting the breath or the Spirit of Yahweh, because his Spirit is his word. Then he invited them in and lodged them. On the next day, Peter went away with them, and some brethren from Joppa accompanied him. The following day they entered Caesarea. Now Cornelius was waiting for them and had called together his relatives and close friends. As Peter was coming in, Cornelius met him and fell down at his feet and worshipped him. I get a little bit upset, I guess, sometimes thinking about these things. But this Cornelius, the word came from Yahweh to call this man. And he's thinking, and Cornelius has been told that you're going to hear words from this man that you need to be saved or delivered. So when Peter got there, this man was really expecting somebody really great. Only because he brought the words of Yahweh. Okay? But I mean, just, look at what this man, he had enough knowledge to recognize that the truth that he was fixing to hear were the words of Yahweh from this fisherman. He met him and fell down at his feet and worshipped him. But Peter lifted him up, saying, "Stand up, I myself am also a man." And as he talked with him, he went in and found many who had come together. Then he said to them, "You know how unlawful it is for a..." Now they used the term Jewish. Peter probably said a Yehudim, or people of the land, "to keep company with or go to one of another nation." See, that was a separation between all these. Okay? Well, the house of Israel is all scattered in all these other nations, right? "But Yahweh has shown me that I should not call any man common or unclean." I've heard sermons preached by people that say Peter just flat misunderstood what Yahweh's trying to tell him. He didn't have the faintest idea what God was really saying. He was really trying to tell him he could go eat anything he wanted to. But he didn't get it. Now, how that kind of a concept can fit with what takes place from here on out, I have no idea. But people are taught that, aren't they? From this passage of Scripture. Verse 29, he said that God, he showed me that I should not call any man common or unclean. Therefore I came without objection as soon as I was sent for. I asked them, "For what reason have you sent for me?" Yahweh has shown me that I should not call any man common or unclean. That includes you, Cornelius, so I'm here. So what do you want? That's kind of what he's saying, isn't it? And Cornelius said, 4 days ago I was fasting until this hour, and at the 9th hour I prayed in my house, and behold, a man stood before me in bright clothing, and said, "Cornelius, your prayer has been heard, and your alms or your charitable gifts are remembered in the sight of Yahweh. Send therefore to Joppa and call Simon here, whose surname is Peter. He is lodging in the house of Simon the tanner by the sea. When he comes, he will speak to you." So I said to you immediately, and you have done well to come. Now therefore we are all present before Yahweh to hear all the things commanded you by Yahweh. You put yourself in the story at this time when this thing is taking place, right? And Cornelius, these people, Yahweh said, you go get this man, this Jewish man, and bring him down, and he's going to have words that you're going to need to be delivered. But it was because the heart of this man was opened to Yahweh and his word, right? Verse 34. And Peter opened his mouth and said, in truth I perceive Yahweh shows no partiality, but in every nation whoever fears him and works righteousness is accepted by him. Go over to Deuteronomy chapter 10. I know most everybody's got a little note somewhere in chapter 10 verse 17 in regards to this, but if you haven't looked at it, we're going to read it. And now we understand the words that Peter spoke. For Yahweh has shown me. Deuteronomy chapter 10 verse 17. For Yahweh Eloheka is Elohi. Elohi of Elohim. And Adonai of Adonim. The great El. Mighty and awesome, who shows no partiality nor takes a bribe. He is the same for everybody.
Hallelujah.
And he's reading this, and he's knowing it from Torah. I think Peter understood Torah. After all, he'd been living for 3 years or so with the walking Torah. Can you imagine living with the walking Torah? Can you imagine Messiah comes back and we enter into the time of all Shabbat, 1,000 years of all Sabbath? You won't have to listen to me talk anymore. That's to Yehoshua what he said, right? Go back, verse 34 again. Then Peter opened his mouth and said, in truth I perceive that Yahweh shows no partiality, but in every nation whoever fears him and works righteousness is accepted by him. He doesn't tell us what working righteousness is, does he?
No, the Torah does.
Torah does. And if he's quoting from Deuteronomy 10 here, then we know he's probably talking about righteousness, what? Which is obedience to the law, to the Torah.
Deuteronomy chapter 6.
Deuteronomy 6. Verse 36.
No. Oh.
Now let's back up. No, in just a minute. I'm getting confused here. But he said, in every nation whoever fears him and works righteousness is accepted by him. The word which Yahweh sent to the children of the sons of Israel, preaching peace through Yehoshua Mashiach, he is master of all. You see, that's still part of that same verse. The word which Yahweh sent to the children of Israel. Who did he send? Messiah Yehoshua, who was what? The Word made flesh. He gave them the written word and then became the flesh and lived that word. Died according to that word. Raised up according to that word. All those who are in him according to that word. They live and breathe and have their life and everything in that word, if that word is in them. If we are a dwelling for Yahweh, who is the Word, then if the Word, Yahweh, lives in us, then who lives in us? Yahweh does. If Yehoshua is the Word made flesh and the Word lives in you, then it's Yehoshua in you. You can't distort the Word, separate the Word, take out parts of the Word, and still say, I have Yahweh and Yehoshua living in me. Doesn't work. It's a lie. It's either all or none. Verse 37, he said, that word you know, which was proclaimed throughout all Judea and began from Galilee after the baptism which Yochanan preached, John the Immerser. How Yahweh anointed or rubbed or consecrated Yehoshua of Nazareth with the set-apart breath and with power, who went about doing good and healing all who were oppressed by the devil, for Yahweh was with him. And what is the power? He was with power, right? And what does the book of Hebrews say? The power of Yahweh is what? His word. The word of his power. Don't go looking for one word with power in it. It's all of His Word. I hope there's another side on this tape. Oh, we got another hole. We got lots of time.
You got lots of time.
Yeah, we got lots of tape too. Okay. In verse 39. And we are witnesses of all things which He did, both in the land of the Yehudi and in Jerusalem, whom they killed by hanging on a tree. You know, I'm sure that everybody at some time or other has either seen or heard about, you know, the movie that was made years and years and years ago called Inherit the Wind. I think Spencer Tracy starred in it, and it was known as the Monkey Trials, or the, you know, Scopes and so forth. And the school teacher who was chosen to be a patsy was taken to court for teaching Bible, so to speak. And then they had men on both sides, one preaching that, oh, well, you know, the Bible is true, and then the other guy, the lawyer who came in, and he was teaching, you know, that evolution was true. And he asked all kinds of questions in the movie, and remember, the movie was based on the transcript of the actual trial. And one of the questions he asked was, you know, well, it says that this Cain went out and took a wife, and where'd she come from? And of course, in the movie, they had this guy playing the part of the preacher, you know, was a real dummy. You know, anybody who believes the truth of the word is considered a dummy, you know. And then, of course, he begins to get all shook up and everything, and the whole thing breaks down. But the whole thing was really based on the fact that the man was supposed to be defending the word of Yahweh, didn't have any idea what it said. Do you think that that's stand up today in court? It'd probably be exactly the same thing, because nobody that would be in court, you know, really understood what the word said. Someone who would, do you think they would understand what he's saying? If they don't understand the word and the man's preaching the word, they're not going to understand him any more than they are the word. It wouldn't make any difference. We can say today, well, if you just read the word, you'll get the truth, but they don't. The desire for the truth of the word has to be there first. Yahweh said, anybody who seeks me with all your heart, mind, and soul, said, I will be found of you. But he's not lost. And Messiah himself, when he was here, said, if you had known the Father, you'd know me. Isn't that what he said? Isn't that funny? The Torah, the word Yahweh, brings us to the Son. We come to the Son, is what does he do? He sends us back to the Torah, back to the Father. No one comes to the Father but by him, is what it's all about. Okay. Again in verse 39, we are witnesses of all things which he did, both in the land of the Yehudi and in Jerusalem, whom they killed by hanging on a tree. Him Yahweh raised up on the third day and showed him openly, not to all the people. He didn't even show him to all the people back then, did he? But to who? But to witnesses chosen before by Yahweh, to us who ate and drank with him after he arose from the dead. He only showed him to certain ones. Remember when Messiah was asked the question, you know, are you going to, you know, how come you're going to reveal yourself to us and not to the whole world? You remember what he said? Those who believe. Those who believe and trust in him and do what the word says do, then he will reveal himself to him, right? But those who are not walking in obedience to the word do not ever have received the understanding. Therefore, they just don't receive the word into themselves. And that word is Yehoshua. And the word Yehoshua means what? Yahweh is your deliverer. Verse 42, and he commanded us to preach or proclaim to the people and to testify that it is he who was ordained by Yahweh, judge of the living and the dead. But Messiah, when he was here, he said, I didn't come to judge. There's another who judges you. What did he say? Moshe in the Torah. But that's the word that he gave Moshe. Right? Everybody forgets that Yehoshua, when he was here, is the one that gave Moses the words to write down. He's the one that wrote them tablets of stone with his finger. He's the one that said, if you'll let me, I'll write them on your heart. Verse 43, to him all the prophets witness that through his name, see, that's why it's important to understand that Yahweh is your deliverer. Through his name, whoever believes in him will receive remission or forgiveness of sin. Believe means to obey. If you say you believe but you don't do it, then in reality you don't believe. Verse 44, while Peter was still speaking these words, the set-apart spirit or the breath fell upon all those who heard the word. Remember, if you go back to the Hebrew, to hear is to hear with understanding and obey. Those who heard are willing to obey. Right? And they hear the word and they begin to obey it, and you know whether you're doing it or not, you've already made the decision to. I would venture to say that everybody here at some point in time prayed, Yahweh, I want to know the truth, Yahweh, and when you show me the truth, I'll do what your word says. He took at your words, he showed you the truth. It's up to us now whether we do it or don't. Sometimes we do, sometimes we don't. Verse 45, and those of the circumcision who believed were astonished, as many as came with Peter, because the gift of the set-apart breath had been poured out on the Gentiles also. My goodness. You mean all them Gentiles can be saved? You mean it ain't just exclusive to us? For they heard them speak with tongues and magnify Yahweh. They heard them speak with languages and magnify Yahweh. What were they speaking? The same thing they spoke back on. They were speaking the word which glorifies Yahweh. Which means then that the Holy Spirit poured out on them was a set-apart word that Yahweh had already said coming upon those people and coming out their mouth. The Spirit moves you, what comes out your mouth? Words of Torah. In verse 47, can anyone forbid water that these should not be baptized who have received the set-apart breath just as we? And he commanded them to be baptized in the name of Yahweh. Then they asked him to stay a few days. Stick around, you know, we got a lot more to learn, you know. Chapter 11. Now the apostles and brethren who were in Judea heard that the Gentiles had also received the word of El. Now up there it said that they got the Holy Spirit. Here it said they received the word. Does that mean it's the same thing? Isn't it amazing how many places in Scripture you find where the word and the Spirit, the word and the breath are the same thing? And yet, you know, people accuse me of teaching something, you know, all kinds of weird stuff. May be true to them. Verse 2, and when Peter came up to Jerusalem, those of the circumcision continued with him. Talking about those who were what? Obedient to the Torah. And remember, all the circumcision, these people thought, well, all you got to do is do what the Word says do. And it's in that act, that ritual of obedience is where your salvation is. You don't need the Messiah. You just go get circumcised and that's it. Right? That's what they were thinking. Saying, you went into uncircumcised men and ate with them? You see, it's already been told. You know, that's what it said. Yahweh done told them, you know, don't call anybody common or unclean, because I done told them clean. But Peter explained it to them in order from the beginning, saying, I was in the city of Joppa praying, and in a trance I saw a vision, an object descending like a great sheet let down from heaven by four corners, and it came to me. When I observed it intently and considered, I saw four-footed animals of the earth, wild beasts, creeping things, and birds of the air. And I heard a voice saying to me, Rise, Peter, kill and eat. But I said, Not so, Master, for nothing common or unclean has at any time entered my mouth. But the voice answered me again from heaven, What Yahweh has cleansed, you must not call common or unclean. Now this was done 3 times, and all were drawn up again into heaven. At that very moment, 3 men stood before the house where I was, having been sent to me from Caesarea. Then the breath, word, told me to go with them, doubting nothing. Moreover, these 6 brethren accompanied me, and we entered the man's house. You see, we didn't know until now that there were 6 of those others from Judea that went with him. But now it says there were 6 of them with him. And he told us how he had seen an angel standing in his house, who said to him, An angel or a messenger Send men to Joppa and call for Simon, whose surname is Peter, who will tell you words by which you and all your household will be delivered. If you change the word saved to delivered, the actual word there is delivered, not saved. We got to get away from the idea. His name is not Yeshua, deliverance. His name is Yahweh is Hoshea. Yahweh is deliverer. And as I began to speak, the set apart breath fell upon them as upon us at the beginning. Then I remembered the word of Yahweh, how he said, John indeed baptized with water, but you shall be baptized with the Holy Spirit. Remember, we're going right back to reading in Mark. John indeed baptized with water. What does the word baptize, or baptismo, means to make holy or fully wet. So he said, he made you wet with water, but you shall be made wet with the holy breath. How do you get made wet with the holy breath of the Spirit? It's the washing of the water of the Word. Isn't that a neat little thing? I got excited. If therefore Yahweh gave them the same gift he gave us when we believed on the Master Yehoshua Mashiach, who was I that I could withstand Yahweh? If he said do it, what are you going to do? You're going to stand up and say, When they heard these things, they became silent, and they glorified Yahweh, saying, then Yahweh has also granted to the Gentiles repentance to life. He has granted to the Gentiles that they can repent. That means turn back in obedience to the Torah and receive life. My goodness. Peter was going to come and give them words of life. You know, this is in the book of Acts, folks. Now those who were scattered after the persecution that arose over Stephen traveled as far as Phoenicia, Cyprus, and Antioch, preaching the word to no one but the Yehudi only. What were they preaching? The word. They weren't preaching New Testament. They weren't preaching New Covenant. What were they preaching? The word, the Torah, and all the prophets, you know, all the word that Yahweh had given to all the apostles and the prophets. That's what they were preaching. You know, we got a couple of 100 years to go before they ever get around to writing the New Testament. But some of them were men from Cyprus and Cyrene, who when they had come to Antioch spoke to the Hellenists, preaching the Master Yehoshua. The Hellenists are the ones who are trying to create a Greek state out of all the world. And the Greek gods are what? The mythology. You know, all the Greek mythology and all the different gods of Zeus and all them other people and all that kind of stuff. I'll get to you in a minute, okay? Verse 21, and the hand of Yahweh was with them, and a great number believed and turned to Yahweh. Then news of these things came to the ears of the ecclesia in Jerusalem, and they sent out Barnabas to go as far as Antioch. When he came and had seen the grace of Yahweh, he was glad and encouraged them all that with purpose of heart they should continue with Yahweh. What did he see? He saw all these people that are being what? Repentant and turning back in obedience to Yahweh and becoming part of the ecclesia. He saw the hand of Yahweh at work. He saw the divine impulse at work. Which Paul had been fighting against. For he was a good man, full of the Holy Spirit, full of the set-apart breath and of faith. And a great many people were added to Yahweh. Then Barnabas departed for Tarsus to seek Shaul. And when he had found him, he brought him to Antioch. So it was that for a whole year they assembled with the ecclesia, the called out ones, and taught a great many people. The disciples were first called Christianos, or Messianic, or followers of Yahweh in Antioch. And it's kind of like this is what they were doing, and they began to call them these followers of the Christ, and it was a derogatory term.
Followers of Mashiach.
And in those days the prophets came from Jerusalem to Antioch. Then one of them, named Agabus, stood up and showed by the spirit of the breath. The breath means what? He received a word of knowledge from Yahweh, which was a word, and he stood up and showed that there was going to be a great famine throughout all the world, which also happened in the days of Claudius Caesar. You know, history will bear that out to be true. Then the disciples, each according to his ability, determined to send relief to the brethren dwelling in Judea. The brethren were those of the family living in Judea who were being affected by this famine that was coming, that was prophesied here. They determined to send relief to the brethren dwelling in Judea, and this they also did, and sent it to the elders by the hands of Barnabas and Shaul. And we're going to close it there for this day, and I thank you for listening and all your patience and everything, and let me get everything cut off.